the 27th of March 2022. Hello everybody, welcome back. Dana at Durnford. This is episode 1000, I lost track so long ago, of the Nuclear Scumbag show. What else name can you possibly give it? Only Nuclear Scumbag. That's about the only one that actually works. That covers all the angles. We've covered 60,000 studies. Not cover, but we showed the people that produced the study. Typically, it gets about a minute or 2 minutes to give you some context of what the study and question about that. By the way, that's the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, also known as United Nations. And like the rest of them, they're monsters. Rani Franovich. Again, Rani, come on. Rani's shooting for a new record this year. How many times we're going to have to talk about it? So, we end our week on a Thursday. Like the actual streams, the shows. And we pick up the first shows on Sunday, which is tonight. I'm starting to think I should go back to 7 days a week. We got a poll tonight, a big shot poll for everybody. Hello from Florida. Welcome everybody. We got 21 votes. Can nuclear survive without thousands of degenerate scumbags? Somebody actually voted yes. That's hilarious. 95% of the people said it was a no-brainer. No, I probably got a no vote because I was supposed to say, where's it to? What I was supposed to say was, can nuclear survive without tens of thousands of degenerate scumbags? See, if I had done that, I wouldn't have got that no vote because they recognize it's a lot more than thousands, Dana. Come on, get with the program. So that's why I got a no vote. Fukushima Health Survey chief to quit the post. So I finished the show Friday night. It was almost 12 midnight my time. And I opened up Nature because I got to wind down and went through some of their studies. And Fukushima Health Survey chief to quit the post, Geoffrey Brumfiel. Now, we've covered him quite a few times over the years. And this was published on the 20th of February 2013. But the author's name is important. And remember, it was it's a study, allegedly, at Nature in 2013. But he was talking about radiation health expert. This is the guy who said if you smile, radiation can't hurt you. A health expert in his health expert, there's a stretch and a half. From the despicable Fukushima Medical University, who, when they set the dose criteria for the Japanese, before Asby Brown and Safecast got out there with their fake Geiger counters and just stole everybody's future, murdered the rest. But Fukushima Medical University set the standards. What they said was the dose was calculated on external doses only, not internal doses. And so for 11 years, the Japanese have only been assessed on external doses. Now there's a precedence for this. For 76 years, Hiroshima and Nagasaki survivors have only been assessed for external doses only, never internal doses. That'll come up actually later in other. So Fukushima Medical University, it's just what they done to the Japanese people. How could you ever trust a university again after you understand just that facet of a million pieces of this puzzle? And the reason it's a million pieces of this puzzle is because there's tens of thousands of degenerate scumbags in the nuclear industry, and it makes it hard to tell a story. It's not my fault. Don't blame me. Don't get on Facebook. They had a pretty good show tonight, but no, they drove me to it. After 2 turbulent years on the job, the head of the Fukushima Prefecture's massive survey to understand the health effects of multiple nuclear reactors melting down is stepping down. We had a party over here in Canada. Radiation health expert from Nagasaki University. His parents were radiated in Nagasaki. He went back and was raised in a nuclear bomb crater known as Nagasaki. 3 meltdowns. There's actually 4, and because they don't take all the fuel out of the reactor core when they're changing it. That's what they were doing. And there's around 200 new assemblies were in reactor 4, actually, installed. It still had a long way to go. And they lost the fuel pools at 8 of the buildings, 2 fuel pools at the top of each buildings. So, again, published on the 2013 second month. Okay, so, Rani, you remember Rani? We'll get to her, who she actually is coming up here in a bit, had wrote an article, Take a Deep Breath, something I have to do a lot of, unfortunately. On March 11th, Jeff Brumfiel. Well, I was like, what's the odds of that? Because I picked this up yesterday and today, and I had it yesterday in a bookmark, but I didn't go through it till today. So it was interesting that I already got these academic studies from Jeff from 2013, and then she invokes them, because that's how they work, right? Control, opposition, fight with each other. That's the game, right? And it's just an imaginary fight, right? So it looks like Rani has some street creds this way, and Jeff gets a chance to defend himself. Everybody gets caught up in the no argument, in the controlled opposition argument. Now she describes them from the National Public Radio Station and American University Radio. Reported March the 3rd conflict, and I don't speak Ukrainian, but nuclear power plant, one of the largest one in Europe, in Ukraine, was in Ukraine. And there was shelling all around it, but we know the real story hasn't come out per se, right? It was far more dangerous than initial assessments suggest. Well, the original reports there were 2 conflicting reports. One was they were targeting, because we covered this extensively, one was they were targeting the nuclear power plant with shells. We're actually targeting the plant. So imminent nuclear meltdown, imminent radioactive plumes circling around the world. And the population that doesn't know a lot about this, that's like adrenaline dump for many days in a row because of that, the way the media portrayed it. We come out and ask the question of, is this the Stockholm Syndrome we're looking at, which is what it was, right? Okay, so published 20th February 2013. Even as the Japanese government evacuated many areas in Fukushima, I'll just have to take this real quick here. Hey, buddy. Hey, I'm live on my YouTube here right now. Oh, hi, Terry. How are you, honey? Hey, listen. Yeah, Mark told me quite a bit, but not everything. Listen, I'm live as we're talking. I'm doing a live show. I have to call you back after. How about that? Okay, honey. Yeah. Okay. Bye bye. Yeah. Bye bye. Bye bye. That's my sister-in-law in Alberta. My apologies. Even as the Japanese government, we just got her started on DCA. Many areas in Fukushima insisted that radiation levels presented little risk, creating confusion. He also made some public gaffes, including telling Fukushima residents to smile and be happy. Now that would be this guy here we're talking about. Right, remember, now anybody's been around a long time will remember that particular one because it got a lot of attraction, a lot of blowback. Now, Asby Brown, a member of Safecast, which is the very last video I done on my other site with 24,000 subscribers while I was out on a spider species count 400 kilometers from here going across the province on the interior, and they just took my site down, a YouTube site down with no strikes, no warning, no emails, no communications, and disappeared me. These people, what they done was, they've turned into real monsters since, right? Is they made homemade Geiger counters when Fukushima happened. They got together, raised the money, got these garbage Geiger counters together, and they were used, instead of universities doing it or contractors or government per se, right? They had volunteers who knew nothing about this out there with gamma at best counters that are not accurate. The idea was to take over, use the people that were motivated to destroy the rest of the people in the country. And they've expanded their operations since. I'm not finished with them by a long shot. But these are terrible creatures, and particularly Asby Brown, a Tokyo-based non-profit organization that was created because of the nuclear meltdowns. And you should see all the people on the board from all the biggest companies, tech companies. Unbelievable what's going on there. It was a really cruel, despicable thing to do to a country. He did a great job of running the actual studies. Is what he's saying about... We lost track, did we? About Asby Brown, that's right. He also made public gaffes. He's seen a big flip. Brown says. So what he done was gave the guy who said smile and be happy street creds for the study. Okay, directly comparing Fukushima to Chernobyl, again, Geoffrey Brumfiel. I was calling him Jeff, wasn't I? My apologies. Total radioactive releases from Fukushima is currently estimated at about 5.5% of Chernobyl. This was another study that he put out. 5.5% of Chernobyl. That was out in September 2011. Now remember, I've done all this before I got rainy stories coming up. The Fukushima fallout is notable for what it doesn't contain. Some very nasty contaminants like strontium-90, because strontium-90 doesn't peak for the first 1,000 days. Say 3 years, right? And then it peaks for about tens of thousands of days, actually, strontium-90. Even then it was for every 137, there was 100 strontium-90. But strontium-90 is not the only strontium that were found. By the way, these buildings had fuel pools at the top of the building, the two red depictions. That's the reactor here. Well, it doesn't anymore, but so the fuel pools at the top of the buildings were decades of reactor cores because they don't have a repository. The reactor cores are 4 times the size of Chernobyl. Chernobyl was a new reactor. These are 40 years old almost. And they store all the fuel in the building in the worst possible spot at the top of the building. Because that's really clever, because everybody's got a 190-foot ladder kicking around. And so that blew up and atomized and aerosol, ionized and radiated. Some of them with China syndrome. This was a mixed oxide fuel, by the way. And in comparison, it's hard to define it because it was mixed oxide fuel, MOX fuel, reclaimed uranium, plutonium, and other nasties, what's known as hot particles. And so you lost 4 decades of inventory that was still splitting the atom. It's the worst case scenario. In fact, nuclear is described by the government, America, as a billion times more toxic than industrial poison. So industrial poison is very toxic. So this is a billion times more toxic because it pulses energy at the speed of light. And that's the problem with the fuel. By the way, that's reactor 3. This is, it was reactor 4. So when you compare just those 2 out of the 4 reactors that all done the same thing, where they were completely like a firecracker with just a stump lift, and the reactor cores and fuel pools at the top of the buildings. In Chernobyl explosion, says Geoffrey, and subsequent fire spewed extremely dangerous isotopes far and wide, implying that Japan didn't. I'll show you a comparison. Now, Chernobyl was brutal. Trust me. We've covered it, particularly on anniversaries where we bring all the academic studies to bear to knock the thousands of scumbags that we got in the poll tonight. Can nuclear survive without thousands of degenerate scumbags? We got 2 people mad at me and voted yes. Oh, I'm sorry, 4 people. Because I should have said tens of thousands of scumbags. Degenerate scumbags. But I didn't, and I apologize. I can't do everything. I'm a busy man. Don't you know anything? That's why it takes 2 of me to do shit. Okay, so Chernobyl, if you go look it up at United Nations, the authority, they're going to tell you 28 people died. There were 600 helicopter pilots.
And you know well at Chernobyl, the helicopter pilots that came in and that deposited the heavy materials to try to put down that fire, which was a very different kind of event than what we're looking at now. But still, there were helicopters, and the pilots all died from radiation exposure. Here's a decision question.
600 helicopter pilots died from radiation exposure. That's Harvard University right after Fukushima. That's interesting, because they say only 28 people died. What else did he lie about? Okay, so here's a map of Chernobyl fallout. And it's not a very good map, I bet you. But anyway, it covers a large chunk of the planet. What's the date? 26, 28 right now on that model. 29th, the 30th of March. Okay, so I'm going to speed that up. So that's the model of Chernobyl radioactive fallout. It's real fallout, right? Here's the Fukushima model. This is a 16-day model. And a 16-day model is based on venting. And so the whole planet's covered in 15 days. So it's a bigger model than Chernobyl. That's just one way of looking at it. I'm just saying. Here's another report that came out the first day or the second day.
The fact that the reactor in Japan is 100 times more powerful than the one in Chernobyl, and in fact the two stations, the two power plants in the Fukushima region produced the world's biggest joint amount of energy, and this means of course that this reactor, which is under threat now, is far more powerful than the one in the fourth block of the Chernobyl nuclear power station, which exploded 25 years ago.
So the Daini he was talking about also, the Daini and the Fukushima plant, were the combination of all of those reactors at those two facilities was more powerful, more energy gigawatts than any other combination, I guess is what he was talking about. Fukushima hotspot raised radiation fear. Geoffrey. Brumfiel. Hotspot raised radiation fears. So this is the model of the Japan's radioactive fallout. I'm not sure, I can't remember off the top of my head which institute this one was. But this model is a 20-day model. And I got there, Fukushima radioactive fallout is global warming, because this has been going on for 75 years. It might be a bit confusing to people. You got an invisible cloud of radioactive fallout from the surface, from the bottom of the ocean floor to the upper troposphere, pulsing energy every second. So if that was a snowstorm, you get it right away. And the snowstorm doesn't pulse cold every second for a million years, right? But radiation does. And the fuel pools, just a quick one for you. The fuel pools at these sites worldwide have no containment or emissions by boiling. And the reason water boils is because the fuel rods are still splitting the atom, but the atom is actually going into the water. It's producing atoms. If it was snow, you would have mountains and mountains of snow covering entire continents, right? But it's not snow, it's invisible. And you can't see it or taste it or hear it or feel it or touch it or pick it up. But does that mean it doesn't have any adverse effects? Now, it pulses energy, all of that is pulsing, each atom pulses energy in every direction at the speed of light, and they're hitting the gammas, the alphas, the neutrons, the betas, are all emitting almost at the speed of light. They hit each other at almost the speed of light and change direction. It's known as a braking effect, and it creates this brutal X-ray type effect through your forest and your entire continent in the ocean. Sterilizes all the species in increments over time, and it seems like after a while they just never existed. Years ago there used to be birds. And the 12th of October, officials reported finding 195 becquerels of strontium-90 on a rooftop. Ooh! Some 250 kilometers south of the Fukushima, which is still bad, don't get me wrong, but the reason they're doing this is to try to convince you that there's a couple of little spots. This is a hot spot, but it's not actually. It is a hot spot, right? If it was a nuclear plant site, it'd be an evacuation zone. But the real numbers are much more terrifying, about the same distance away. 5.82 microsieverts per hour at a children's theme park. Government session reveals 400,000 times normal radioactive xenon 133 levels in Chiba. 400,000 times normal. Which is a lot more than 195 becquerels of strontium-90, a bone seeker, on a rooftop 250 kilometers away. Chiba is about 220 kilometers away. These are catastrophic numbers. There's no escaping these numbers. And this is just one of the many isotopes we're talking about. The same day, an inspection at Tokyo, back to Geoffrey, the district turned up a narrow strip of pavement. It was 3.35 unisieverts an hour. They later traced the Tokyo contamination to an abandoned house containing bottles of radium-226. Just one of my favorite crap bullshit stories in a long time. A radioactive element once used in luminous paint. First off, you don't measure radioactive fallout in unisievers. You're talking atomic decays, like my Geiger counter up in the corner. Like they're doing here, is 195 becquerels. These are atoms pulsing energy 195 times every minute or second, whatever they're calibrated for. You had 400,000 pulses. The numbers may be much higher. So some of the numbers in Tokyo were actually 276,000 becquerels pulses. So you can see my Geiger counter. I'd actually get up and run if my Geiger counter done something like that. Of radioactive cesium, which is a gamma. Again, you'll see this constantly where they pretend there's no plutonium or uranium or americium or neptunium, just cesium. The reactors don't run on cesium. The biggest byproduct is curium, by the way. From soil samples near Tokyo, almost 18 million becquerels a square meter. So what's worse, 18 million becquerels a square meter or 195 becquerels on a rooftop? This is what they're doing to try to confuse you, by the way. So back to the 195, they said the newly discovered hotspot poses no threat to the human health. Says the wanted war criminal Geraldine Thomas, a radiation genocidal maniac from the United Kingdom Imperial College. This will be her. Dr. Jerry Thomas, wanted for genocide and crimes against humanity. Last seen killing children with chemo. Description: a monster who kills children for the nuclear industry with nuclear waste.
So, for example, coming here, I would have got a dose of 0.07 millisieverts on the flight. And I actually went round Fukushima Daiichi on Wednesday, and the dose that I had going around the site, so very close to where the reactors are, it was 0.01 and probably lower, but that's the lowest it could actually read. So I got more of a dose flying here, and we'll get a dose tomorrow when I fly home, than I would have done from being in Fukushima.
That's just cold, man. That's cold. The radiation, the radiance you get from going up in the plane has got nothing to do with the stuff leaking or hemorrhaging or covering the entire planet from man. It's got nothing to do with it. And the people, and she knows better, she, for a hobby, she gives children chemotherapy and exterminates them. Strontium-90, 245 kilometers from the meltdown, was 150 times the background, which was, who knows, at that time in Japan was 24 counts a minute or something. Strontium-90 can cause bone cancer if ingested, but a small patch on the roof won't cause that problem, demon said. Meanwhile, west of Tokyo, 24,000 becquerels a kilogram, multiplied by 68 to get a square meter, the size of your kitchen table. In soil samples, 250 kilometers away. And Christopher Clement, the scientific secretary of the International Commission on Radiation Protection, which is United Nations, right? Which is 190. It's actually 195 militaries. It's sedition what they're doing, United Nations. George Bush Sr. calls them the New World Order. There you go. If you say it, you got to play it, Dana. Otherwise, people are going to call you a liar. Well, he shows everything else. Why didn't he show you that? He's got something to hide, that boy. Georgie. I'll get the volume. I might have to play it to get the volume.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
The promise and vision. Everybody got to give up their liberties and their freedom and their world so that they can live out their vision. They're the New World Order. That's what he called them, right? Now we know what it is. It's a global government. It's a military-industrial complex that also wants to be the government of everything. So they can have all the minerals, all the oil they ever wanted, all the uranium, it's all free. They own it all. And they can just, once they get everything, then why keep us around, right? Well, it already got to that. That's why Fukushima was allowed to happen. Independent international organization provides guidance on safety levels of radiation, self-imposed, might add. Its recommended residual doses from a nuclear reaction between 20 and 100 millisieverts per year. That's very kind of them to volunteer me to get 20 to 100 millisieverts a year from an industry that's not supposed to exist. The entire legacy is predicated upon deception, misrepresentation, and deceit, and dishonesty, and genocide, and ecocide, and omnicide. High levels of radioactive material in Tokyo, 170,000 becquerels a kilogram in the sewage. If you're excreting 170,000 becquerels a kilogram in your excrement, well, and you are, because and that's also in the water reclamation centers, which gives it credibility. Oh, and you see the same thing in the garbage incinerators ash. It's just a coincidence, I'm sure. So the water sediment from the filtration plants, they store it in 15 one-ton bags. There's one city north of Tokyo that has some 55,000 or something of these one-ton bags of sediment from the water reclamation center that is so radioactive they can't get rid of it. Because normally they would take the sediment from the water reclamation, water filtration plants, and use the sediment from the filtration as soil because it's very rich, right? They can't get rid of it because it's so radioactive. And then, which means you're drinking the radiation because you can't filter it out. Radiation got these nasty effects, right? High levels of radiation, that's just a scary. Every facet of that story is so scary. Clemens says that everyone should be prepared for more false alarms like the one in Tokyo. No matter where you go in the world, if you take a radiation instrument with you and look around, you'll eventually stumble across something that's above the background of that area normally is. All right? Stop crying like little babies. But This is not normal. This is not a little bit above normal. This is, what? 29 million becquerels a square meter in the soil after it rained? Is it going to rain again anywhere in the next couple of years? Because that's enough for a while. That ain't going away for a couple of million years. 100,000 becquerels a kilogram to be incinerated, because why not? Everything else is radiated anyway. And Fukushima will start burning radioactive waste. They got 1 billion pounds at over 100,000 becquerels a kilogram. That's dirty bombs by the kilogram. They're only checking for gamma. What about alpha, beta, neutrons like uranium and plutonium and americium? And Fukushima plant will burn radioactive waste incinerators to run around the clock. Incinerators. At a nuclear, multiple nuclear meltdown site. More dirty bombs. Japan doctor, Tokyo should no longer be inhabited. That's 2014, for goodness sakes. And save the future generation. Scientists, plan to release 1 million tons of wastewater from Fukushima. Nature 2021. That was South Korea protesting it. 1.25 million tons of seawater pumped through the damaged unit to stop the molten fuel debris from overheating, and the pumping continues. Now they're talking about 150 tons a day that they're putting in the tanks. The rest of it is filtered and then pumped back in on the nuclear reactor meltdowns. These are lunatics, by the way. None of that is true. First off, 1.5 tons a day is what you get out of a garden hose. For 4 multiple nuclear reactor meltdowns, you got a garden hose split between 4 of them, do you? Oh, yeah. They're lunatics, I'm telling you what. The contaminated water was treated to remove the radioactive material and stored in more than 1,000 steel tanks on the site. So shut up, okay? Fear-mongering. The only problem with the story was that in 2013, they had, you guessed it, 1,000 steel tanks. It gets worse. In 2014, they had 1,200 steel tanks. 2017, they had 900 tanks. Try walking down the road like that, both feet, your toes and your heels on the ground. Try holding your arms straight up and down like that. By the way, if those tanks are filled at 2.2 sieverts per liter, that's 1.4 million sieverts. 2.2 sieverts per liter, 5 gallons is a lethal dose right away if you just walk past a 5-gallon jerry can of it. The steel tanks, by the way, need to be about 4 to 5 feet thick to shield you from the neutron bursts and X-rays and gamma shines. The hard cases. Japan will have to dump radioactive water into the Pacific. 2019, they had, you guessed it, 1,000 tanks. 2021, you know it, 1,000 tanks. So they had 1,000 tanks in 2013, 1,000 tanks in 2022. And they can't keep up with it. They're storing water all the time, day after day, year after year, like fucking slaves. Fukushima hotspot raises radiation fears. The release of the treated wastewater is part of the standard operation of nuclear power stations that melt down. Well, they didn't say that, but what they're trying to say there is, don't worry about it, it's just trivia. Nuclear power plants release that shit all the time. Leave us alone. We're in the nuclear industry. We're better than you scum. Noting in the plan suggests that the treated water will contain levels of radiation greater than the background level present in the environment as a result of natural processes. So they're saying the stuff they're putting in the ocean is less radioactive than the stuff that's already in the ocean, which is probably true if their tanks were actually full of treated water, but it's not. Tanks are empty. The tanks were built to trick you into thinking they didn't kill the Pacific Ocean. They're not thinking days, they're thinking decades down the road when people finally wake up. Not this decade, last decade, obviously, but maybe this one. We've done the research expeditions year after year to document the species on the coastline. It was quite easy, really, because there was no species. Man, did I ever get attacked for doing that, eh? That was something. I was under siege year after year after year. I was spending 4 or 5 months a year in the ocean, and I was like the most hated man on the entire planet. And every public relation firm on the planet just spit and angry that I was out there looking for a species. It was really something. Which operates to Fukushima. Tokyo doesn't exist no more. They're nationalized. The government took it over a couple of days after. They went bankrupt. Says treatment removes most radionuclides. Good for them. Like, find another time that Tokyo didn't tell you everything was hunky-dory. Includes cesium and strontium, but only tritium remains. Oh, you shouldn't have used the T word. How Japan, by the way, reactors don't make tritium, they make tritium-3H. That's how we know they're lying. How can Japan settle the issue of Fukushima, Daiichi, tritium? This is Forbes. I was like, this is Forbes, I'll check it out, drink it. Because we know what Forbes is going to say, right? Just give it to babies only. It's harmless. Because Forbes is a demonic demon. Research in the discharge of radionuclides to the atmosphere and assessments of the maximum permissible discharges in the context of reprocessing of nuclear power plant fuel element. Research in the discharges of the radionuclides to the atmosphere, which is global, and assessments of the maximum permissible discharges. They got no way of controlling it, see? The fuel pools are always hemorrhaging. That one you couldn't get any documentation because you had to have a special permit to get into the site and you had to pay a lot of money. You paid for the study originally. North America produces 4.5 million studies each year. And then it's given Elsevier, Springer, and Wally for free. And they got 22,000 of the biggest journals on the planet. And they're going to put it behind a paywall. And they're going to charge you, or the 20 or 30 people that might read it. I don't see the numbers there for this one. Go back one. Yeah, it doesn't say. Normally it'll tell you how many people looked at it. It's usually, most times it's 2 or 3 or 4 people because it's locked up behind a paywall and nobody gets to read it. Possible ways to assess the content. Okay, so there is stuff available though. The toxicity of tritium from the Lawrence Livermore Laboratory. We all agree are mostly degenerate scumbags, but once in a while they slip up and this gets out in the public. Among radionuclides of importance in atomic energy, 3H, which is tritium. It's called tritium-3H, not tritium. It's either called 3H or tritium-3H, but not tritium. Has relatively low toxicity, but this is concern, however, because very large amounts, which is all nuclear power plants are hemorrhaging. All the water basically is radioactive because it's decrepit, are involved in nuclear fission and fusion. Impressive quantities. Now, fusion is going to be just brutal on tritiated water. Impressive quantities are released to the environment. Tritium in its preferred state, water, has free access to living cells and organisms. And the main health environmental worry is the possibility of significant biological effects may follow from protracted exposures to low concentrations in water. To examine the possible hazards and measure toxicity at low tritium concentrations, Chronic exposure studies were done on mice and monkeys, and during vulnerable developmental periods, animals were exposed to tritium and mice were exposed to 60 cobalt gamma irradiation and energy-related chemical agents. The biological endpoint measures were the irreversible loss of female germ cells. Effects from the tritium were absorbed at surprisingly low concentrations, where tritium-3H was found more damaged than previously thought. And comparisons between tritium and gamma radiation showed the relative biological effectiveness to be greater than 1 and reached approximately 3 for low exposures. For perspective, other comparisons made between the... It's very interesting. You should read through it yourself if you get a chance. Parallels in actions on germ cells between pre- and postnatal exposures warns of possible special hazards to the fetus from both classes of energy-related byproducts of cesium and tritium. So they were comparing it as equal to tritium on low doses. So radiation affects the tritiated seawater on the development of gooseneck barnacles. Well, I didn't call them goosenecks, but everybody else calls them goosenecks, right? I used to harvest them years ago. They were measured in a monitor containing tritiated water, concentrations of background plus 0, 10 to the 5, blah, blah, blah. After 32 days, the cultures were fixed and the numbers of larvae counted. The percent of larvae that molted at least once was used to evaluate the effects of tritiated water. Molting index, the percentage of larvae that molted at least once was used to evaluate the effects. Effects were observed at concentrations, very low concentrations, and so these environmental possibilities. Tritium radiobiological effects in mammals. There's all kinds of studies. Tritium, the radiobiological effects of tritium beta radiation in form of oxide 2 to 6 times higher than for gamma radiation 137 cesium. That's a Russian study. So there was a consensus anyway of all these studies that tritium is the furthest thing from harmless or benign or innocuous. It's a complete further. The results of this investigation used to standardize HTO and the various biogenetic compounds of tritium. Okay, I'll keep rolling here. We got a lot on the go. But you can read through this on your own time. You'll see what I mean. You'll see. I see. So Deborah, a nuclear chemist and director of the Center for Environmental Radioactivity at the Norwegian University of Life Sciences in Oslo, adds that tritium is a natural occurrence. But that's not what we're talking about. You shit for brains. We're talking about anthropogenic man-made, moron. Excuse me. I'm sorry. I kind of lose it sometimes with these thousands of scumbags we got to run into all the time. Which, by the way, we got a poll like, can nuclear survive without thousands of degenerate friggin' scumbags? How the hell do we ever get up to 12% says yes? I suppose people are saying, yeah, if we got rid of all the scumbags, then nuclear could survive. But nuclear can't, because nuclear is a dirty, despicable industry that has no right to exist. It's a plague on all species, particularly the breathing species. Estimated yields of double-strand breaks from internal exposure to tritium. $39.95 you pay now. Internal exposure to tritium may result in DNA lesions. What part about that is you can't wrap your mind around? Huh? of those DNA double-strand breaks are believed to be important because the tritium is pulsing energy, but it doesn't pulse it very far, but it pulses far enough to snap the DNA in a chromosome, because that can't be good, because you can bioaccumulate an absurd amount with 120-year half-lives, 120-year lifespan, 10 half-lives, 12 years each. You can't get tritium in your body without getting all the other absurd. We've seen numbers, not of tritium. Well, it would have been tritiated water for sure, but a liter of tritiated rainwater with 220 million iodine, 129 atoms in it, that has a half-life of 15.9 million years, which is 150 million years. When it gets in your body for 15 million years, it's going to pulse energy every second. You'll be long gone, but it'll still be pulsing energy every second, destroying your DNA and your chromosomes. Loss of tritium from irradiated uranium dioxide during oxidative processing in air. Tons and tons of studies. You can't get access to a lot of it, right? The problem of tritium, which is 3H, for the International Thermonuclear Reactor ITER. I was trying, because fusion a couple of years back was getting a lot of attention. And I think it was a Saturday or something where I decided I'm going to go through all my hunts and look for issues with the future of fusion, see if I can try to wrap my mind around the technology a bit better. And tritium was one of the biggest problems with a fusion reactor was tritium, how it was absurd. I didn't know what to do with all the tritiated water. It was a machine for making tritiated water, unfortunately. I wish the technology worked out, but it didn't. And so covering up and irradiating the entire planet was wrong. It's wrong, man. Tritium in water system in the Ural regions. So before nuclear, typically you might find 2 atomic decays of natural tritium per cubic meter, 1,000 liters of water. The paper gives the data. Now it's like everywhere. You can't escape it. It's disgusting that they've done that. It's a betrayal. It's like finding cyanide everywhere you're to. You got to wear gloves all the time because there's so much cyanide everywhere. It'd be like madness, right? How do you avoid it? The paper gives the data based on the many years observation over tritium content in water ecosystems among all tritium, which is natural tritium they're talking about, but that's because they don't call it 3H. Almost all tritium, and they're talking about 3H, in the Ural regions, including the controlled plots, was of anthropogenic origin, man-made. Nuclear enterprises are the main source for environment contamination, which tritium 3H, in the areas where such enterprises are situated, should be developed in blah, blah, blah. So they're saying everything is contaminated with anthropogenic man-made. So what's the big deal? Put more in the environment. Well, first off, it's the cover story. As I showed you earlier, hopefully you caught that. If not, maybe later. New radiation safety standards for tritium compounds. Standards, safety standards. Anybody tell TEPCO what a safety standard was by chance, I wonder? Not that TEPCO actually exists, just the nuclear industry. Probably the World Nuclear Association is TEPCO, right? Childhood leukemia, ionizing radiation. Let me see, we're almost through that stuff, aren't we? A product of ionizing radiation, tritium transmutation formed in the DNA. Calculations, radiation-induced DNA damage from protons and tritium beta particles. They're talking about 3H. And 90 strontium, 137 cesium, tritium in the Baltic Sea in 1972. So it's been going on for a very long time. They finally went too far with it. Now there's no way back. And pretending it's not happening is not a way forward, is the problem. That's the problem, really. The industry, right, the problem with the industry was its children, and I call it because that's how you describe these creatures, its children from inbreeding in the nuclear industry are the next generation, and their children from inbreeding is the next generation, and their entire legacy is predicated upon being actual criminals and evading the population's understanding of the dangers, right? So they got to keep the law alive to keep the jobs for each generation. And now they're kind of coasting. This generation is the entitled lot. My dad was a monster and my mom was a monster, and his dad and mom were monsters. Their dad and mom were nuclear monsters in the Manhattan Project. And my turn now. Shut up, slave. That's their attitude, right? Radiation protection, tritium instrumentation. So does that sound like potassium to anybody? I can fill up a football field with potassium. I go there and sleep there and live there and hang out there, and it ain't going to give me an extra dose. But if there's some of these atoms there, you put 2 million atoms in the head of a needle, you can't see it. Let's get it on anyway. So the tanks were built to trick you into thinking they didn't kill the Pacific, because they knew they were going to kill the Pacific. Let me explain that to you, because this is not very difficult, okay? If you're honest, so you see that, now normally the Kuroshio current crosses the ocean about 45, 47 days, give or take a couple. But the problem was, you don't need the Kuroshio current, but it is there and it's very effective. The radioactive fallout, according to France's model and every other model on the bloody planet, shows complete covering of the Pacific and then the Atlantic and then planet Earth in just 16 days. Do you think it stopped coming out? So this is the Atlantic, this is the Pacific, and that's the Atlantic, North America, America, Canada, Iceland, Greenland, blah, 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 blah. So at the end of 16 days, we go another 2 days, all this is covered. Go another 3 days, the rest of that is covered. But it's still hemorrhaging out of there. Okay? All right? Am I telling you another 500 times? And so it covered the ocean within a couple of days. This model is 16 days. Let's keep it rolling, because why not? More than 1,000 tanks are holding contaminated water scattered around this side of the nuclear wasteland. At 2 sieverts an hour, or better, because why bother counting gamma, alpha, and neutrons? Which is very, very rare, actually, isn't it, for them to mention beta? Because it's usually just gamma radiations, which all of it's nasty, no matter how you look at it. Some are more nastier, but they're still all going to get you in the end. You can't have one without having the other 3 emitters, by the way. Some of these are both emitters. 2 sieverts an hour or better radiation from a single liter of water. This was the water they were putting in the tank. So if you've done that once and emptied the tank 5 minutes later, that tank is so radioactive, if you fill it up with fresh water, that's lethal water too now, because there's so much residual. The tank itself now is irradiated. If you take square foot of the tank to the local subway, everybody walks past it will die that day and that year, every day for 9,000 years. So it has very, very bizarre properties, very, very long. And your senses don't say danger because you can't smell it or see it or taste it or hear it or feel it or touch it or pick it up or throw rocks at it. So a single liter, so a 1 gallon sat out here on my desk when I started the show. I'd be dead by now from just emissions of it. If it was in a restaurant, it'd kill everybody in the restaurant in 20 minutes. If it took 5 gallons of it to each subway worldwide, you can wipe out hundreds of millions of people each day that walk past it. That's how dangerous we're talking about it. It's going to be like that for many, many, many eons. And if you did release it, and you did, constantly, because you can't contain it, because if you contain it, you can't build all these tanks on the site. The problem with it is that if you fill up 1 tank, you can't build another tank on the site, because you have 1.4 million sieverts per tank of just beta. But, a classy, educated person is going to say, what about gamma and alpha neutron? Because that's there. Neutrons there. Uranium, plutonium. That's got to be there. Curium. And by the way, for curium isotopes, you need lead shielding that's 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium-241, which is lethal. By the atom, the body attacks itself relentlessly. More than 1,000 tanks holding contaminated water. We counted the tanks, there's only 750. Even under the worst case scenario modeled, in which all the water is released at once before it had been fully treated, as if the 1,000 tanks was the only water that was ever... First off, the reactors typically use 4,500 tons a day. A minute. 1,440 minutes a day. So just one reactor can fill up all the tanks 6 times each day under normal conditions, trying to keep it cool and stop it from running away. Where it gets up to 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures, you're going to need at least that much water each day. So the amount of water they're talking about, they had 1,000 tanks in 2013, 1,200 tanks in 2014, 900 tanks in 2017, and still only got 1,000 tanks in 2022. Somebody's not being honest. Levels of radiation exposure in the marine environment will still be 100 times less harmful than background radiation. Okay. 200, that's a study from Ottawa, Canada, showing 220 million atoms per liter of the iodine-129 in the rain per liter of rainfall. Does rainfall by the liter only? This was sustained, obviously. This is just another model to kind of give you context of what happens with nuclear events. 15 million year half-life. There's 10 half-lives. It's nothing but deception every step of the way with these fuckers. Excuse the language. Human civilization may destroy itself. Mikko Kaku, a famous physicist in the United States. So, look at Fukushima. Liquefaction of 3 nuclear reactor cores. It was actually 4 and 8 and 8. Don't know what to do there. Hiding fingers, thumbs. 8 fuel pools. First time any core ever liquefied. They're still out of control. 311 disaster can start all over again. That's true now. This is why we've done videos about the earthquake down there, because you can start a recriticality by all that debris getting shaken down on top of the melter reactor core. When we're being hit by a plume is the way you would assume, right? After a couple of days, because that's how it works. A Nobel Prize winner. Only way to preserve human life is to completely turn away from nuclear power. Gee, I wonder what he's trying to tell us. It was like that guy who was drowning, and this boat came up and says, "Can I help you?" He said, "No, it's okay. God will help me." And the boat went, "Okay." He's drowning. And another boat comes up and says, "You okay? You need help?" He said, "No, God will save me." Anyway, he drowns and he gets up to heaven. He said, "God, where were you?" He said, "Dummy, I sent you 2 boats. Get in there." Nobel Prize winner. Only way to preserve human life is to completely turn away from nuclear power. Gee, I wonder what he's talking about. First off, why are nuclear power plants all surrounded by farms? You don't want to know the answer, trust me. They're always hemorrhaging radiation from the fuel pools, let alone... When they change the fuel, they got to open up the containment. Guess what happens? All that radiation been contained comes out. Only way to preserve human life is completely turn away from nuclear power. That's why they're bringing 1,000 temporary workers for a couple of weeks. They don't want the cancer rates and 1,800 illnesses and diseases that comes with it showing up on the statistics. Major U.S. paper, time to quit nuclear power altogether, threatens the very existence of human civilization as we know it. Do you think that if the Like, you can't threaten human civilization without threatening the other 8 million species, who are, by the way, much more vulnerable to the radiation, bioaccumulation. I shouldn't say much more vulnerable, is that I only say it in the context of it'll start manifesting there first. If you look, you'll start seeing species are not replenishing themselves, particularly like the feeder species, stuff like insects, say mosquitoes. Frogs will eat them, and all kinds of insect birds will consume them. If you look at, I can't remember the exact number, it's like 28 or 30 birds' nests, and they had 1 or 2 eggs per nest, and parents were feeding them insects to baby birds for a little over 4 weeks or something, 3 weeks. And they estimated it was 5.8 million insects to raise 28 nests of new hatchlings. 5.8 million. That was in a study. We covered, I can't remember the exact numbers, so don't quote me exact numbers. So when you break that chain, guess how that plays up the rest of the chain? Time to quit nuclear power threatens the very existence of human. Once a nuclear accident occurs, everything is over. Tokyo legal expert. Zero prospects of ever restoring the fishing grounds. All will be lost. This is the reality of nuclear energy. A leading director in Japan, nuclear power generation is the only invention that may destroy the future of humans. Get back to this one. IAEA input. In a move that could further allay critics' fear in a global first, the International Atomic Energy Agency is working with the Japanese government. Way to go, Japan! Wow, you're really... whatever. Is planning, implementing, and monitoring the release. Really? The goblins are? Is anybody surprised? A coalition of goblins. And a global first, the International Atomic Energy, is finally allowed. Like, what happened was about a month ago, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, aka United Nations, said they're going to Fukushima to get water samples. You're like, really? They're going to get up to the tanks and get the water in the tanks, get some samples? No, shit. No, Dana. They're going to go 20 kilometers offshore and get some samples of the salt water. Dana, geez. They're nuclear experts. They're not going to Fukushima. That's where they said the homeless, and the destitute, and the victims of society, and the immigrants who don't speak the language. Dana, I never thought I'd see it today. The International Atomic Energy Agency is working with the Japanese. Praise the Lord. My goodness. Ha. Well, snobs now. Big shots now, boy. We are going to be there before, in the planning and the calibration phases, says Grossi, who I showed you at the beginning of the show, by the way. That was Raphael Grossi, the Director General of a subsidy of United Nations known as the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, based in Vienna, where, because there's no extradition laws there, I guess, we are going to be there as the operations take place, and we're going to be there after it. Well, where were you for the last 11 years, Grossi? You bike seat sniffer. Japan's nuclear crisis, Fukushima legacy of fear, our friend Jeff Brumfiel. Japan's worst ever nuclear accidents placed more than 100,000 people. It was 500,000, scumbag. 485,000, but many could now safely return home, yet mistrust of the government prolongs their exile. This is 2012, you demonic demon. Many could safely return home. They hadn't even picked up a bag yet at this point. By the way, these bags are 1-ton bags of radiation. You know what that there is? That's a farmer. You know what he's doing? He's harvesting rice. You know what for? to ship it to Canada because Canada lifted restrictions on the imports from Fukushima 93 days after it started. 55 countries banned the product in 14 prefectures, not just Fukushima prefectures. These crazies are harvesting food right alongside of 1-ton bags. It's bad enough they grew it there. That shouldn't have been allowed. That should have been like a mandatory life sentence. But to actually get to the point where you're going to harvest it alongside of 1-ton bags, you think that's just a one-off or something? They're crazies. There's around 800 million pounds of rice a year still coming out of there. They never stopped. They never started picking up any bags till 2013, for goodness sakes. They never stopped growing food there. Farmer woke up one day, all these bags were there, like, what the hell is that? Another guy, Teo, has a background in high-energy physics. But on this sunny February morning, he and a dozen volunteers have joined local farmers in removing the top few centimeters of radioactive soil from rice fields. And when the soil is frozen, we can remove it easily, like a board. In a corner of the field, they dump the soil in a hole lined with absorbent sheets. So you got a radioactive field. They're going to go out and scrape off the top couple of centimeters, dig a hole in a corner, and bury it. And because they're only talking about cesium, like that's all that's going to come out of it. By the way, they picked up 60 million 1-ton bags. Because why not?
There's about 60 million tons of contaminated soil that's being stored, planned to be stored, outside the Fukushima Daiichi perimeter fence. So,
ruthless, eh? When spring comes, the ice melts, but the radioactive cesium will be absorbed. So we can protect it from leaking out, he explained. What kind of kooky crap is that, man? These are lunatics. First off, this is the Neptunium-239 dispersal model. We got so many of these different isotopes dispersed worldwide. The numbers are from TEPCO, by the way. The volunteers, mostly researchers, informally called themselves the Fukushima Revitalization Association. Mostly researchers and volatile radioactive chemicals, notably iodine-131, which is not, it's the biggest byproduct of radiated fuel rods is curium, which killed all the animals and all the experiment, by the way. Most notably, iodine-131. Now, this is a 2012 story, and so they put that there because it's only got a short 8-day half-life, and there's 10 half-lives, right? And so they get you into thinking, they've been doing this for 76 years, get you into thinking this way that, it'll be gone in a couple of months, see? So if you do come across it later, you're like, there's iodine-131, who cares about it? When Unit 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded, in 1986, the Soviet government imposed a strict information blackout. The word MOX fuel, nuclear meltdowns, and everything was banned immediately after Fukushima. The situation could hardly have been more different at Fukushima. In fact, Twitter took $55,000 just to get rid of a couple of accounts on Twitter when they were burning it in the incinerators. The situation could hardly have been more different. Do you think they stopped doing that? Within the first 24 hours, the government began reporting radiation readings. They had 5,500 speedy models that they wouldn't release. In the following days and weeks, the deluge of information became swollen with data from university researchers, the military, the international monitors, and representatives of the U.S. government and concerned citizens. We almost got too much, says Malcolm Crick, Secretary of the United Nations Scientific Committee for the Effects on Atomic Radiation, also known as UNCLEAR, a.k.a. scumbags. These are degenerate scumbags. This is United Nations again, of course, the UNCLEAR. and ERPA and the ICRP in Vienna, along with Grossi and the rest of them. It is already evident the rapid evacuation, careful screening protected Fukushima citizens from harm, says Wolfgang Weiss, we've collared many times over the last decade. A physicist at Germany's Federal Office of Radiation Protection in Munich and chair of Unclear, aka demonic demons. So they control all the controlled opposition. They fight with each other. It looks like, wow, this organization looks pretty good. No matter which one you support, your money still goes to the United Nations, which is 195 militaries. Right, NATO's 30 militaries. They're not supposed to exist. It's sedition. They're taking over the sovereignty of the whole planet almost. And they're in the final stages. Now they're getting antsy after 76 years. Early an informal analyst by his colleagues suggests no members of the public received a dangerous dose of radiation. Wow. Well, that's pretty reassuring. Unfortunately, that's not accurate. The whole planet was dosed heavily with incredible numbers. It's outrageous, though, that they wrote those lies, is all I'm saying. And what the problem is, there's tens of thousands of them. We got a big poll going there. You got a bigger poll with 85% says that nuclear cannot survive without thousands of degenerate scumbags. That's hilarious. They got 15% thinks they can. Do I really get that many trolls on my site? For starters, have anybody seen the name of my video, Nuclear Scumbag Show? Normally, the idea of that is to get the pro-nuclear community to leave me alone, go away. I can't go there, it reminds me of a nuclear scumbag. Damn you, Dana. No, still come here and just harass me anyway. So come here and troll me, and it's probably all professors, no doubt. That finding is supported by a sweeping public health study begun last summer. That finding is supported by a sweeping public health study. Now, this is 2012. You know what else happened in 2012? Well, hang on, I'll show you. Don't be so pushy all the freaking time. The Cancer Institute in Japan came out and said it was 865,000 extra cancer patients in 2012. That's significant, okay? Because cancer is usually the last one to show up. Because you get heart problems, liver problems, lung problems, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome. There's all kinds of problems. Your immune system is immediately compromised. You're more susceptible to pathogens and viruses that were normally harmless and benign. Fukushima Medical University with a $78.2 billion, $958 million budget. So the Fukushima Medical University set the policy for the people for external doses only, not internal doses. And I covered that last week several times. You're not going to make me do it again tonight, are you? Come on, man. Come on. I got a lot of work to do here. Give me a break for a change. The survey is designed to monitor the health of some 2 million people. That's a lot of money to spend. That's like 50 cents for each person. According to the latest estimates released on the 20th February, 99.3% of 9,750 people living in towns or villages close to the plant received less than 10 millisieverts in accumulated effective dose in the first 4 months. This is madness, by the way. The numbers in Tokyo were like 29 million becquerels a square meter. But ground zero, they got nothing. The worms is 60 miles away, 60 kilometers away, had 1.4 million becquerels a kilogram of excrement. They picked up 60 million one-ton bags at 100,000 pounds, 100,000 becquerels a kilogram. But ground zero only got, that's disgusting that there's creatures like this on our planet. But this is nuclear, so it's normal. If it's not a monster, then that's not normal. That's like, wow, what the hell was that? Somebody was normal? After all these years, I still got yet to see it. I was at this line before Fukushima happened. On top of that, that's the scariest part of all of this. Most of the people I've met here refuse to fill in the questionnaires, and they don't see credibility in what the government does. It's just a survey of guinea pigs. It's just the right prognosis. As radioisotopes spread from the plant, covered the whole planet in 16 days, the government was repeatedly forced to raise its recommended safety limits for radiation exposure to the citizens, the slaves, and workers, the homeless. Otherwise, it would have been legally required to evacuate the site immediately. Which is you can't fill up the tanks because you'd have to evacuate the site. Because the tanks are not thick enough to shield you, for starters. Imagine filling up 2 tanks, let alone 1. See, we know it's fake because you can't build another tank on the site if you fill up one of the tanks. So if you fill up one of these tanks, you can't build another tank. It's a lethal dose from quite a far distance. And the tanks were hastily built. They had all kinds of excuses when they originally built it. They were bolted together. They were all leaking. And so the numbers, we covered the numbers. I can take you down that road if you want. You don't want, trust me, because we got a lot to get through already. Come on. Japanese government simply had to increase the safe limits to enable the people to keep working. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Not to bring the nuclear plant under control. Let me show you what the model of the radioactive fallout looks like again. Maybe you missed that. Does they look like they got it under control? Huh? That's 16 days. Hard cases. The best thing to do, according to Chernobyl, is to really turn the first meter of soil upside down, said the head of Unsclear, Wolfgang Weiss. But if you do that, you would kill the whole ecosystem. Because you're burying the soil on the spot. The radiation, every time it rains now, that's assimilated into all the root systems. That all becomes irradiated on top of that. It's not like, and because it's pulsing at the speed of light, it's pulsing at least 4, 5, 6 feet through the soil. And when you're saturated with this stuff, they're all hitting each other and changing direction at the speed of light, because it pulses at 186,000 miles per second. Almost the speed of light, right? So gamma, alpha, beta, neutron does this in pulse in every direction, like a ball. It'll do. Some of it will do it for millions and millions of years. Citizen cleanup crews carry out rudimentary decontamination in villages like Minamasoma. Minamasoma was looking at 10 million becquerels per kilogram. It was evacuated for many years, right? But the people ended up moving back there because they lifted the limits, and then they allowed them to move back into a nuclear wasteland. And this is what, like, at least he's wearing a paper suit. TEPCO says they burned 7,000 of them a day, which is, if they're radioactive, for starters, you're liberating the radiation back into the environment because you can't destroy it by incinerating it. But on the flip side, a paper suit can't protect you from gamma shine and X-rays and neutrons. Now, it's better to have clothing out. Your normal clothes is thicker than your paper suit. Just throw it away every day. Well, you can't avoid getting sick in this environment. This is why we see catastrophic numbers over the years of illnesses, like 6 out of 10 children with diabetes. And they're expecting the diabetes from Fukushima, of course. Ideas to remove decontaminated cesium based on existing technology. Japanese Atomic Energy Agency. These are definition of goblins, by the way. Deputy Director of the Japanese Atomic Energy Agency, Fukushima Environmental Safety Center, for example, scouring cesium from roads with a high-pressure water jet was thought to be insufficient because contaminated water was simply spread across the pavement. Because that's how radiation works. You can't, in power wash, you're just going to move it, if you're lucky, or not, you're just going to move it somewhere else. You can't destroy it. This is not like engine grease, okay? But engineers have modified the system to recover the contaminated water, purifying it and recycling it. Does anybody even believe that one? First off, the filter becomes so radioactive, that's a lethal dose. You can't get near it. Because you're talking about particulates from fuel. You're talking about not just atoms from splitting the atom, you're talking about fuel. What's known as fuel fleas in the industry. These are shocking emitters. These are terrifying numbers we're talking about. People are not allowed to transport the waste, so they put everything in holes on their properties. And there's one guy who was moving the waste off his property, and they arrested him and accused him of being nefarious. He was just trying to get, like everybody else, they have nowhere to put the waste on their property. Because they get the Geiger counters to go back to their property like, oh God, I got to get rid of the topsoil. Which does help, but you can't get rid of the radiation, because the minute it rained, that was saturated through the entire ecosystem. But it's assimilated into cement and steel and rebar and automobile paint and door frames and doors and everything else. On the East Coast, and same as the West Coast, we've seen the species disappear. We've done the research expeditions. On the East Coast, we're doing expeditions too. And one of the strange things we're seeing down there is spiders on everybody's buildings and homes and that. But not in the forest, not in the bushes, not in the trees. And you'll see the spider web be tied from a building to the automobile or a structure. And if it's to an automobile, you break the bond, the next day it'll be more spider webs overnight onto the vehicle. Because they can't tie on to the bushes, because the bushes sucks the radiation up. And we know that they're gone from Nova Scotia too, because we talked to researchers when I was on the expedition last year looking for spiders and birds. And we found 3 deformed spider webs over the summer. Shocking. You should get around 150 per square meter and around 500,000 per acre. People are not allowed to transport the waste, so they put everything in holes on their properties. That's just frightening. Every time it rains, it just washes through the system. But they're lined with absorbent materials. Yeah, but no filter can filter radiation is the problem. Yeah, it'll catch some, but that's not the right solution is all. Not burying it on your property where the roots are ultimately growing. Setting, and it ends up in the water table and is distributed wide and far. Of course, permanently, everything becomes irradiated from coming in contact with it. Setting low radiation dose limits are already damaging the economy around Fukushima. Because, first off, it's a nuclear wasteland. You're not supposed to go back there. The Japanese ignored that part. Later this year, the health ministry is planning to lower the safe levels for cesium in vegetables, grain, and other foods from 500 becquerels per kilogram. Because immediately after it, America and Europe both raised their limit over 1,000 becquerels a kilogram to make Japan's 500 new becquerels a kilogram. Previously it was 0.01 becquerel per kilogram of just gamma, by the way, to 100 becquerels per kilogram. And why are you lowering it? Why did you raise it? Well, because you refused to stop poisoning the entire planet. So 55 countries banned food from 14 prefectures. Almost half the country was so radioactive. Canada's like, we'll take it. The University of Tokyo says that food will radioactivity lower than 500 becquerels a kilogram is not harmful to human health. The University of Tokyo, then people have said that should be arrested and prosecuted. And that's the problem we got a poll tonight for everybody. Can nuclear survive without thousands, tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands of degenerate scumbags? Well, the fact that 14 voted, how did they knew they were degenerate scumbags we were talking about, see? That was a no-win for anybody to vote no on that one. It shows the nuclear industry knows they're degenerate scumbags, otherwise they wouldn't have voted at all. University of Tokyo says that food with radioactivity lower than 500 becquerels a kilogram is genocide. That's genocide. They're only checking for gamma, cesium in particular. Allegedly, you know how they're checking? They gave the farmers Geiger counters. And they said, if it's over 500 becquerels, don't you ship it. You hear me? I'm like, what the hell is this? Good stuff. You have a good day. What is this? Hey, yo, come back here. The farmers were given Geiger counters and told to check the food. Useless Geiger counters on top of that, and at best could only check for gamma. It's so evil it defies actual reality, don't it? I mean, that's evilness, what we're talking about. It's on a whole different scale. Because 500 becquerels a kilogram, it's not like you're just going to eat one meal on top of that. That's your... Every day now you're allowed to have that much man-made anthropogenic radiation in your body's bioaccumulating in your muscles, your organs, and your bones. Every single atomic decay, say there's 500 atoms there per kilogram. And say a couple of hundred of them sequesters in your muscles, your organs, and your bone, the first meal. What happens is that your body is attacking every atom with white blood cells to try to get rid of it, right? So if you had a cut on your finger, your body, from your joints, and your spleen is far away. So your joints will just produce the white blood cells to repair the little nick on your finger. That'll take a couple of days, right, to seal it up. And then your white blood cell count starts going down. Your red blood cell count, which is displaced by the white blood cell count, will start to come back up. Your red blood cells carry oxygen and nutrition throughout your entire body. Now, if you got radiation in your body attacks it permanently. So the red blood cell stays down, the white blood cell count stays high. Now you eat some more food, you sequester more isotopes in your body, radiation in your body is pulsing energy every second. Your body attacks it with white blood cells permanently for the rest of your life. Each meal you're bioaccumulating more. By and by you got way more white blood cells than red cells in your body, and they call that leukemia. Backed by strong demand from farmers, the ministry recently decided to allow cultivation in most areas of Fukushima as long as cities and villages and towns can prevent the distribution of rice containing more than 100 becquerels of cesium, which is a United Kingdom pronunciation. So there's a heavy influence from United Kingdom on that particular study, which means evil as it gets, right? But the ministry will only allow because that's the legacy, right, of Sellafield and Windscale and Donneray, which won't even be cleaned up for at least 300 years. Not that any of us could be around to find out whether that's true or not. But the ministry will only allow one experimental cultivation in areas that produce rice containing more than 500 becquerels. These are maniacs. This is not only criminal, this is insane. This is genocide. This is what you would define as a genocide pre-Fukushima, was doing stuff like that. Right? That's, if say one of your popular boogeyman like North Korea, which United Nations burnt down every community with napalm, of course. Millions dead, millions missing, millions in refugee camps, 10 million injured, and isolated for over 70 years. Because that's how United Nations rolls, right? That was their first thing they done, was let's go slaughter North Korea, turn them into a boogeyman. And then that's been used now for 70 years to terrify people while they conquer empire building. But the ministry will only allow experimental cultivations in an area that produce rice containing more than 500. Never mind. Fred Medler, a radiological, I can't even pronounce that, a radiologist. What the hell is going on here? Radiologist, serving as the Unclear panel, Unclear, which is United Nations, which their entire legacy is just hideous. I've never caught him telling the truth a single time. Rather than setting a strict number or limits, he says the discussion should be more open-ended. We tell the people what's there, we tell the people what the consequences are, and they decide whether to accept the risk. It's like a banana and a potato chip and walking in the sunshine and getting on an airplane and sleeping next to somebody. Do you really want to take the chance? Because that's all propaganda, right, from these guys. It has none of those attributes. We're already acclimated to natural stuff, see? Through genetic superior selection, why we exist. And they decide whether to accept the risk. Let the cards fall where they may. That's not your job. Your job is to set the limits. External exposures to gamma, which is cesium, to humans from soil influenced by the Fukushima and the Chernobyl. A comparative study. External exposures to gamma from soil contaminated. Take a deep breath. Rani Franovich rebutes the nuclear NPR coverage of the nuclear plant firefight. Well, there wasn't soldiers at the nuclear power plant firing back because they're targets. This is like they've done with, I'll find you an example. So, during the renaissance of nuclear weapons, that's a scary way to look at it. During the nuclear renaissance of nuclear weapons, where are we going, Tom? Looking for. Hard to appreciate how much we got on this computer. Got to do this the hard way. Typing. Yeah. What the hell did I do with that? So what is the biggest polluter on the planet again? I'll show you here. So one container ship equals 50 million cars of pollution because they burn bunker fuel, right? The world's 15 biggest ships create more pollution than all the cars in the world. The world's 15 biggest container ships. There's 90,000 of those on the ocean, which is equal to around 45 trillion people every day when you scale it up. And they're not regulated. They shouldn't be burning bunker fuel. Bunker fuel implies they're supposed to be on a storage site for 1,000 years to break down naturally, because it's the leftover. The 15 largest ships in the world emit as much nitrogen oxide, sulfur oxide as the world's 760 million cars. And there's 90,000 of them on the ocean at any given time. Rani says, as a former inspector with the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission and members of its Fukushima response team in 2011, so the nuclear, there's around 4 million emails released. A lot of it's redacted. A lot of it's from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And we've covered that for several years, a lot of it. I'm going to start doing it again one of these days. And there was a big dump, right? And I used to put the links under all of my videos. I haven't got them back up. I suppose I should get them back on my news site here. That is highly censored, this site in particular. I'm deeply dismayed to see newscasters and journalists and various commentators continue discriminating, let me get on the big screen. Continue disseminating lurid misinformation, especially at a time when nuclear energy is gaining an urgent and widespread support as a safe, reliable alternative to fossil fuel. Such commentary undermines progress in mitigating climate change and securing United States energy independence. Right? So, yeah, Fukushima happened, but let's cover it up because we have an agenda and we're better than everybody else, so it's okay. It's okay if we do that. Don't worry about it. There is no effect. Let me go back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago. So each of these are missile silos, each of these red dots, and they're in communities. And so if an adversary attacked one of these missile launch sites, it wouldn't be reported that way. It would be reported that they attacked a little community, and we're going to stand by our boys and fight the Ruskies or the Chinese or the commies or whoever. Right? So they're using the communities as human shields by putting their nuclear weapons. At one point there was 55,000 of these distributed out all over. I have a number of these maps where it's absurd. And they're put in the communities. Mr. Brumfiel, who we were talking about for most of the night here, obviously. Now, she brings him up because he wrote an article as part of the machine, right? There's miscommunication sometimes, and they attack each other, but it's okay because they're part of the machine. A video from inside the plant showed damage possible Russian shell that landed less than 250 feet from the Unit 2 reactor building. A shell that landed... Well, first off, if you want to take down a nuclear power plant, it's pretty easy. You just tear down the lines. So you have an anchor, and it gets thrown over the lines. You have a cutting edges on it. And you just jack the lines, cut the lines, can't connect it. The reactors are dependent on external power. Also to start up the generators. If you lose external power, you can't start up the generators for a lot of this stuff. So they'll melt down after about 50 minutes. They start melting down and don't get water for the running reactors. So if they really wanted to take out the nuclear power plant, all they had to do was take out the external power supply or just shell the fuel facilities. They have some hardened facilities there, but it wouldn't be hard to bust it with 155 millimeter depleted uranium munitions like the tanks are using, aka dirty bombs with a 900-foot kill ratio and leaves the crater 100 by 200 foot. They could probably break it open. Confirmed fire damage to a training building. There was some rather interesting stuff here. Security authorities confirmed reports by Ukraine nuclear regulators, the industry itself, the State Nuclear Regulatory Inspectorate of Ukraine, damage at 3 other locations at the nuclear power plant. The Unit 1 reactor compartment, auxiliary buildings, the transformers for reactor Unit 6, which meant that can't function, obviously. And the spent fuel pad used to store sealed canisters. I think they had 150 of them, didn't they? We were covering it originally. Nobody knew originally what was going to happen, so we're treating it with a lot of caution and paying attention. These reports indicated no safety functions were affected and that plant radiation levels remain normal. And further confirming that reactors were safe and the integrity of the used fuel storage canisters was maintained during the shelling. And if not, then you have a ecological, radiological dispersal effect worldwide immediately. It's stupid, because these things are outdoors sitting on cement racks. Security video footage of the March 3rd conflict showed ordnance striking a high voltage line outside the plant. An update from the International Atomic Energy Agency, Grossi, Raphael, told 2 of 4 offsite transmission lines were damaged, leaving 2 power lines plus the one on standby available at the plant. Because each nuclear power plant needs 2 external coal, gas, or oil power plants dedicated to the nuclear site itself to run it. It can't run on its own power. It can't run without, and it's usually coal, because coal is the cheapest. And in the land of coal, and that's what gets used. Again, no damage to any of the reactor's essential safety equipment was reported. The evidence stands in stark contrast to early comments by the International Atomic Energy Agency, which, while acknowledging the seriousness of the assault, emphasized the action took place away from the reactors. IAEA Director General Scumbag Grossi made references to only a single projectile hitting a trading building adjacent to the reactor complex, which wasn't true, see? Which is fine. It is not clear what an NPR would insinuate the IAEA Director General Grossi, Director General, good for you there, man, made false representations, which that's his job, isn't it? The best available information at the time he was interviewed, March the 4th, shortly after the shellings. We covered that when it happened, actually. His statement then that all the safety systems of the 6 reactors of the plant were not affected at all were in fact confirmed. Plant radiation levels remained normal, further confirming the reactors were safe. First off, you can't believe these people. This is what we cover all the time. These are perpetual liars. If they say there's nothing to worry about, you better freaking worry. A week earlier, March the 3rd, similar shield commentary accompanied news reports around the world by shelling by Russian forces. It was symmetrical right around the entire planet. Purported experts on CNN, which is a military-industrial complex, harken back to Chernobyl and Fukushima, and the most significant watershed event in the history of nuclear power generation. The most significant watershed event in the history of nuclear power. Well, they had quite a few, haven't they? The Tsar Bomba for the nuclear testing was equal to 3,800 Hiroshima bombs going off at one time. It's the same radioactive fallout. It was a spectacular event. The Bikini Atolls is over 1 million square kilometers. Is highly radioactive, both under the ocean and above the ocean. There's so many events, barely keep up with it. And a calm voice entered to fray good old Dr. Dracula, a.k.a. Edwin Lyman, the director of the Nuclear Power Safety at the Union of Unconcerned Scientists, which is left over from the Manhattan Project. They're a real good lot to be trusting. And Lyman is the first one out there every time something happens saying, Chernobyl's world's worst nuclear accident, dip, 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 dub, dub, dub. Lyman's, he used to polish, never mind. The loss of a possibility to cool down nuclear fuel will lead to significant radioactive releases into the environment. As a result, such an event may exceed all previous accidents at nuclear power plants, including the Chernobyl accident and the accident at Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, which was hundreds of times worse than Chernobyl. Chernobyl was brutal in maintaining cooling of the reactors in the spent fuel pools, which are reactor cores stored in water. It boils off about 120,000 liters a day into the environment. Each liter is saturated with isotopes. That's why they're surrounded by farms, right? In summary, for hundreds of miles, they build them in farmland on purpose so they can keep the background levels down, because the farmers are shipping it to market all on a regular In summary, comparison of shelling, and I can't speak Ukrainian, so I'm not going to try a schizophrenic name like that, to the tsunami and accident in Fukushima Daiichi, to the Chernobyl accident, which involved design flaws. It doesn't matter if it had design flaws or not. It happened. It had radioactive emissions. And this is just gutless response to it. Is uninformed and reckless. No, it's not. And government officials and media alike should take a deep breath before issuing inflammatory reports of a looming nuclear disaster, says Rani Franovich, as a senior policy advisor for the Nuclear Energy Innovation Team. There's nobody's throat she won't cut to keep her hand on the power switch, right? So she wrote another article. Oh, she put a name on it anyway. One thing that the Washington Post op-ed on nuclear safety wasn't built to survive scrutiny, which is true of the nuclear industry, right? Nuclear industry can't survive actual scrutiny. That's why they got Rene. Since Russia invaded Ukraine, misinformation about Ukraine's nuclear reactors has been repeated in mainstream news. It's dangerous because it perpetrates long-standing misconceptions, radiological risk of nuclear power to the public. No, it's always hemorrhaging radiation is the worst thing ever created was nuclear power, while ignoring its benefits to human health. It has zero benefits to human health. Really, it has zero benefits to human health. It's a catastrophe for the human health. Around all, let me quantify that assertion, of course. So Chernobyl was infinitely bigger. So let's just look, Fukushima was infinitely bigger. So let's look at Chernobyl. I got a really simple way of breaking that. It takes me a second. And it's nuclear. What else is new? Almost. Gotcha. There you go. Booyah! Here's a couple of handfuls of studies. I'm going to shoot through them. And so this was radioactive fallout from Chernobyl effect that we're going to talk about. And I showed you the models of Fukushima. Let me show you the models of Fukushima first. This is a 16-day model. This model is from France government. And this model is only based on a fraction of what actually happened. But it covers the planet in radioactive fallout in just 16 days. All right. So let's look at Fukushima. So I got a really interesting way for you to appreciate how nuclear fallout works. The influence post-Chernobyl fallout on birth defects, abortion rates in Austria. So Austria is quite a long ways away from Chernobyl, Dana, exactly. Trends in human sex odds at birth in Europe, right, after the Chernobyl nuclear. So what are they doing? Because it changed the sex ratio of males to females throughout Europe, which meant you had to poison everybody in Europe to get... And what happens is you get a big discrepancy between males and females, which shows up in the study, and this is what they're talking about, which means if there's more males than females, there's less babies, right? And this can't be true for... If it's true for humans, it has to be true for the animal kingdom too, and birds and insects and mammals and animals and everything, right? Okay, so think about that. So when you see these discrepancies, don't just think of humans, because that's that's the part they're leaving out for you. Prenatal loss of 400 male fetuses in Czech Republic because of Chernobyl in one study. Just one spot, right? Secondary sex ratio and trends in associated gender-specific births near nuclear facilities in France and Germany. So they're also seeing it just around normal operating power plants. But even light power plants, which are experimental ones, are showing these same kinds of discrepancies. Non-thyroid cancers, Northern Ukraine in the post-Chernobyl period. Congenital abnormality registries in Belarus. In Japan currently, in 2019, a study came out in congenital abnormalities that it was 14.2% per 100,000 births across Japan needed open heart surgery to neonates and infants. It was 1 in a million pre-Fukushima event. Fallout from Chernobyl accident overall cancer incidences in Finland. So Chernobyl wasn't just a 30-mile exclusion zone, obviously. Down syndrome time clustering, yeah, that's right. Down syndrome from radiation fallout in Belarus, time clusters, is blamed on Chernobyl. Chromosome aberration to Norwegian reindeer. You weren't allowed to eat the reindeer for 30 years after Chernobyl. Or fish freshwater lakes in Sweden for 30 years because of Chernobyl. Assessments, 256 assessment and influence of Chernobyl on birth defects, abortion rates in Austria. Estimated lifetime doses to hunters and families, the 3 most contaminated countries in Sweden. Counties in Sweden because of Chernobyl. Differences in effects and radiations, abundance of animals in Fukushima, Chernobyl. Well, the large species are migratory. Geraldine Thomas, who we talked about earlier, Scumbag, she's in charge of the Chernobyl Tissue Bank and the Hiroshima Nagasaki Tissue Bank. The perpetual lawyer is actually in charge of them. It's the most evil scenario you can imagine, is to have a absolutely soulless, heartless creature like that in charge. Incidences of legal abortion in Sweden after Chernobyl. Ionizing radiation, human gender proportions at birth. Legally induced abortions in Denmark after Chernobyl. Pregnancy outcomes in Finland after Chernobyl. 15-year follow-up after Chernobyl because of delayed symptoms, right? There's a lot of latency for a lot of illnesses. Pregnancy outcome in Norway after Chernobyl. Early infant mortalities in West Germany before and after Chernobyl. Human sex ratio at births in residential proximities to France's nuclear power plants. You see big discrepancy in just normal power plants. In fact, I've seen studies where it's 6 times more breast cancer within 15 miles of a nuclear power plant. Population exposures to iodine-131 releases from Hanford. Preterm births, infant mortalities. In fact, there's a graveyard there with over 700 children with deformed skulls. Chernobyl, I can't remember what you call it. Sarcophagus, or I can't remember. Chernobyl cover-up, radioactive fallout, neural tube defects. Global implications of Chernobyl. Global implications. Potential for disease initiation by inhaling beta-emitting nuclear particles. Wait till you look at neutrons. Infant mortalities after Chernobyl. Pregnancy outcome in Sweden after Chernobyl. And the outcome of dental abnormalities in people living in radionuclide contaminated regions. Abnormal retina pigment in the eyes from congenital eye defects from Chernobyl. Leukemia incidences after iodine-131 exposures from Chernobyl. Effects of radiation on the reproduction system of all species, not just humans. Prenatal irradiation induced brain neuropathological and cognitive impairment. Human sex ratio at birth after atmospheric weapons testing. So worldwide, the human sex ratio was changed because everybody got irradiated. That's got to be true for all the animals and insects and birds and mammals and animals, all the species, see? Down syndrome in Scotland because of Chernobyl, and schizophrenia because of Chernobyl. So when they say there's no adverse effects from so-called low-level radiation, they're clearly wrong on a terrible scale on top of that. And if I could find all this documentation I show you tonight, which is kind of overboard, surely they could. And her rows of basins filled with radioactive spent nuclear fuel are reference to the spent Fuel pools with used fuel assemblies neatly stored. Neatly stored. Well, because if you touch each other, they'll go into a criticality, a chain reaction. Stupid. In matrix grids, which is where they gotta be, to stop them from accidentally touching each other. Under pools of clear filter, which is bore-rated water. It's not clear, it's not filtered. It's special water, no minerals, because minerals can cause adverse effects. Bore-rated water, and a house within a containment structure with 5-foot thick concrete walls. Yeah, but it boils off 120,000 liters a day in the water in a typical pool, fuel pool, because these things are still splitting the atoms. The water is saturated with atoms on top of that. The reason the fuel is only 5% got used, 95% of the fuel capacity is still there. But what happens is the zirconium claddings gets trillions and trillions of microscopic cracks in it. And because the stuff we're talking about coming out of it, the atoms, you can put 2 million of them on the head of a needle, you can't see it. So they can easily hemorrhage out of the trillions of cracks. The reason that the fuel is in the water is because it's still splitting the atom, which produces the heat. But it's hard for people to wrap their mind around what we're talking about. So if you can physically see it, it would be an invisible snowstorm all day. Right? It's invisible to the naked eye. Neatly stored in pools of clear, filtered, and bore-rated. Now, the pools are over capacity because they don't have a repository anywhere on the planet. So they'll store decades of reactor cores in pools that were only supposed to hold a couple of 100 tons on a bad day. But that design was built into it, that they can put more water and store more assemblies in there. And assemblies are around 1,800 pounds each. Got around 100 fuel rods that are 18 pounds each and 12 feet long is typical. Housed within a containment structure with 5-foot thick cement walls with no ceilings, with pure venting. Go look it up yourself. Instead of explaining how or why the plants are fragile, because you can take out the external power supply, for starters. Usually they only got 8 or 9 hours of diesel on site to run the generators. And if you're in a war zone, how are you going to get anything in there? Right? There's a whole lot of these questions. But not only that, if you break the pool, if you crack the pool and you lost external power, you can't keep pouring water in there. If you start pouring in normal water, well, as soon as you expose the top part of the fuel rods, it catches fire. Right? The zirconium cladding reacts with oxygen, catches fire, and that starts producing hydrogen. The hydrogen displaces all the oxygen in the building. If you introduce a spark or more oxygen into the building once you displaced it originally, and it's now saturated with hydrogen, that'll detonate, right? It's the same thing for a sodium reactor, which is why you have Santa Susana, which emitted in the United States, they emit now, a long time ago, by the way, because it's still melting now. They admitted that it was over 460 times more radiation released at Santa Susana than 3 Mile Island. And at 3 Mile Island, they admit over 2 million people got a major dose. They called it a microsiever. They said it was equal to watching color television for an extra year. Now, that's simply absurd to suggest that natural stuff or man-made stuff is equal to a color television, because a single atom is very dangerous. This is why we had charters originally for these places. They used to say not a single atom will get out of the site, which was 100% propaganda. That's how they got their original charters. Nuclear generation emits zero carbon. This is absurdness. This is absolutely absurd to suggest that. First off, you're boiling 4,500 tons, 4,500 1-ton pickup trucks of water every minute is boiled in order to produce energy. So a typical glass of water, like this is a big glass, a typical 16-ounce glass would have 1 billion creatures in it, and a 75 to 100 million of them are the phytoplankton, the basis of the food chain, the basis of the oxygen chain, the basis of the carbon sequestering chain. And the rest of it, the other 900 million creatures in it, are the soup of life. So you atomize an aerosol or just boil them into their carbon sequesters, right? And so not only that, carbon is not what's going to destroy the planet. Carbon doesn't pulse energy every minute. Carbon doesn't produce plumes. Coal, oil, and gas emissions don't produce plumes that covers the entire planet. And they certainly don't produce plumes that covers the entire planet for millions of years, pulsing energy every second. Nuclear does, and did, and continues to do so. And the more you add, the more energy is pulsed. It never goes away. You can just keep adding it. It keeps more. You got more pulsing all day from 1,000 fuel pools worldwide. Unlike coal and gas, and is much more reliable than other green technologies like wind and solar. Well, in 2021, there was 391 gigawatts of renewables came online, or 291 gigawatts of renewables, which is equal to 333 nuclear power plants coming online in 12 months. Right, the year before was 260 gigawatts of renewables came online. And so by 2025, they're expecting around 4,800 gigawatts of renewables to come online, which is actually more energy than all coal, oil, and gas and nuclear combined currently on the planet. Right, because this exponentially keeps expanding each year, right? And everything is being reined in for the last 2 years with the scamdemic. In response, Dr. Adam Stein and I co-authored, which is Rini, co-authored a modern light water nuclear reactor sheathed in cement containment structure supported by multiple redundant electric cooling system, which is what they said about Chernobyl originally, what they said about 3 Mile Island, what they said about Santa Susana, what they said about Fukushima, what they said about the SL1, what they said about Sellafield, surrounded by large exclusion zones, really. Large exclusion zones around a nuclear power plant. Now we heard it all. That's the newest one. Hang on. Try to make this as painless as possible. Oh, I'm in the wrong business. I got to get into the nuclear apologist business. That's the shit right there, baby. All I want for Christmas is me degree to go out and lie for the nuclear industry. So they're all exclusion zones, are right? They're surrounded by farms as far as you can see. That's an exclusion zone there, all those farms. Look at that. Oh, see all those farms? You think this is an accident that all these nuclear power plants are surrounded by farms? Is there anybody that gullible on the planet that they think that all these farms is just some random accident? No, we accidentally look again, that's Canadian, the first meltdown on the planet, Chalk River, still melting down. They're entombing it in place, right? So why are all the nuclear power plants built in farmlands, Dana? That's a great question. Wish somebody had asked me the last time. Well, because the radiation, a lot of radiation falls quite close to the reactors. So even future reactors surrounded by farms. So the farm sucks up the radiation, and you eat the food, get sick, and die. The pharmaceutical industry makes all the money, and you get sick and die. Because that's got to be an accident. But do they know any better, Dana? Gee, that's a great question, too. There's so many studies showing how radiation is sucked up by meadow ecosystems, how it's transferred to the soil and roots, how fruit plants suck up radiation, potatoes suck up radiation, how wheat sucks up radiation, studies on strawberries sucking up radiation, grapevines sucking up radiation. Gee, I wonder how they missed all those studies. when they were putting nuclear power plants in farm countries. Well, just what you get when you got 76 years of no checks and balances, right? There's no incentive not to be evil. And guarded by security forces. These are high schoolers with a permit to carry a gun. That's the qualification to be a security guard at a nuclear power plant. And you don't have security guards at coal plants or oil or gas because they're not going to contaminate and kill the entire planet with radioactive fallout. In an article she wrote for BNI, 5 Myths About the Chernobyl Disaster, she's talking about Professor Brown, who we've covered quite a few times, and has her own share of propaganda on top of that, alleges underreporting of prompt and latent fatalities caused by accidents, and speculate the actual number may be far higher around Chernobyl, for instance. She claims that reports at the time of the Chernobyl accident underestimated the consequences over the plume of radioactive gases and particulates, which I already showed you is true, obviously. Did you know they closed 9,400 farms in Ireland and Scotland and the United Kingdom after Chernobyl? And only recently, there's still over 400 closed a day, but it was after 2010, but you still have to check all the sheep and stuff before you can sell the food. So when you close down 9,400 farms because of radioactive fallout, you got an entire country that's radiated. Your fresh water is not safe anymore. Your corn, your wheat, your potato fields are no longer safe either. Your communities are not safe. The radiation doesn't go flying across the continent, 3,000 miles looking for farms, okay? Her theory that an alleged cover-up shortly followed the Chernobyl accident exists to this day is unfounded. I showed you it's 100% founded, and that I showed you the birth defects and abortions and schizophrenia and Down syndrome showing up and associated with all those studies. I gave it all to you, baby. Her theory that an alleged cover-up shortly after Chernobyl exists, and it does. As I showed you from Harvard University, over 600 helicopter pilots had died. Early reports are hardly relevant after 35 years. Extensive studies of the radiological, environmental, health consequences of the Chernobyl accident in the most heavily contaminated areas, Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine. Well, like I say, 9,400 farms closed in Ireland and Scotland and the United Kingdom. Hang on. It was actually 9,400. We covered it a few days ago, didn't we? Ooh, where are we to? I'll find it. Bingo. See, the whole problem is okay, so first off, this is supposed to be a picture of a guy in front of the Chernobyl elephant foot. Does that look like 200 tons of nuclear fuel to anybody? Am I missing something? So I put myself in front of the reactor. It's okay, I didn't get hurt. I'm perfectly safe. The sheep farmer is still stuck under a Chernobyl cloud. Over 9,000 farms, it was 9,400 farms, were placed under restriction for 24 years. And 400 are still under restriction today. They're all still under restriction. They all have to have radiation checks before the farms can sell anything. Most recent studies have collaborated with the International Atomic Energy Agency's 1991 findings. That between 1988 and 2018, the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of the Atomic Radiation. Additionally, the ongoing work of Professor Jerry Thomas, who was wanted for crimes against humanity. The Imperial College of London, who specializes in cancer genocide. She kills children with chemotherapy for a hobby. She also goes out and does propaganda presentations in communities worldwide. We've called her out no less than 100 times over the last couple of years. Professor Brown, we've called her out several times, further characterized deliberate Cold War bomb tests as nuclear accidents. She claims they're far worse than Chernobyl. The 3 mile, or hang on. Better to show you and try to tell you. That's the thing, the only thing that works anymore is to show it to people. Yeah. Show me the evidence, Dana. Hang on, I'm getting there. It's not easy being me. So if you look up this study from 2019, radiation contaminated a huge swath of land and ocean extending over 1 million square kilometers and severely impacted the habitability of the affected atoll. Radioactive fallout from the testing program. 1 million square kilometers. She implied that Japanese response to Fukushima Daiichi accident was inept. So, it was. Hang on. Why y'all gotta be so difficult for? France says Japan lost the country, control. The French to leave the country. Remember that? Guardian. With one more quake, Japan will cease to exist. Resulting destruction will take to half the planet with it. Swiss embassy evacuates Tokyo, fearing radiation. Fukushima uncertain. Hang on, I'll get to it. High radiations around the plant. Helicopters prevented the helicopters from dumping radiation. Official unsure what to do next. Korea calls Japan handling of Fukushima incompetent. I don't see Rainey calling out them. The EU Energy Commissioner called Fukushima an apocalypse. So there. Don't eat the food from Fukushima or Japan, because 14 prefectures were banned in 55 countries. That's the 14 prefectures there. See, my Geiger counter battery gave up the ghost. Let's get back out of there before. It was inept. The last thing the families, the fellow Ukrainians, or neighboring countries need to be burdened with is irrational fear, stroked by reports like Professor Brown's of an imminent nuclear doomsday. Well, it is, because it falls out of the sky. It only takes a couple of days to cover the entire planet. We got the documentation. What do you want? Emotion stirred as relationing hearing begins by Abby Lubby. This was 2007. So this was 3 Mile Island, Indian Point. In 2007, guess who was on the Nuclear Regulatory Commission back then? Was Rainey. 2007, July the 5th. And one of the advocates for closing Indian Point's license were up for renewal, asked Rani Franovich, the branch chief in the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's Division of License Renewal, if the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has acknowledged that the greenhouse gas is produced by the nuclear fuel cycle. And Franovich said that it is mentioned in NRC's genetic environmental study. So she was asking him, did the NRC recognize that the whole fuel cycle, including burning in the reactor, have greenhouse gas production? And she said, I don't have it in front of me, so we will actually have to come back to that question. Ellie persisted by responding, does the NRC's generic environmental study validate the nuclear fuel cycle releases greenhouse gases? Rani Franovich said, yes, it does. Concerned Indian Point opponents asked why the emergency evacuation plan considered unworkable because of the plant's proximity to dense population areas was not part of the relicensing application. The plant's proximity to densely populated areas. You couldn't evacuate the people if they had an accident at Indian Point because there was just not enough room to evacuate people, is what they were saying. So it should be denied, right? Because you need to be able to get people away from the nuclear wasteland. Not the coal plant if it burns down, or the oil plant, or a gas plant, but the nuclear plant. Don't take your pets, leave them behind to starve to death. Slammed energy for polluting the Hudson River with superheated water from a discharge canal, which he says was decimating the river's population, fish population. I'll actually quantify that assertion. The Hudson River is the main recipient of Indian Point's pollution, runs past New York. The river does not belong to Entergy as their private dumping ground for radioactive superheated water that will contaminate our environment for generations. The plant supplies reliable energy to the city. Our members depend on Indian Point jobs, Connolly said. Okay, so go read this story here. How nuclear kills fish at Indian Point and in New Jersey. New Jersey, New York now requires nuclear plants to install modern cooling systems to prevent the death of billions of fish each year. That's Indian Point. Environmental analysts in 2 states have found that the facilities kill more than 17 billion fish annually in New York and another 9 billion in New Jersey. Annually, each year. National Marine Fisheries Services found that the once-through cooling systems are vacuuming up trillions of newly hatched fish, and remember that for after, and destroying them in their heat exchangers. And that there is strong evidence that the decline in fish stocks along the entire northeast Atlantic seaboard is due more to the destruction of baby fish than the overfishing of adults by commercial fleets. Think about that statement. Because there's 440 nuclear plants worldwide doing it. The Indian Point plant on the Hudson River sucks in 2.5 billion gallons of water every day. 2.5 billion. 1 million gallons a minute per reactor. It kills about 2 billion juvenile mature fish a year in the screens and the thermal plumes. These are all the different types of way the reactor is killing fish. This is not all just one way. This is all the different ways. And that the NRC estimated more than 300 billion baby fish are killed in each year when they're sucked into the 40-foot wide intake pipe. 40-foot wide. The width of a big house sucking in water every minute. But Connolly said the plant supplies energy to the city and the members depend on Indian Point for their jobs. For the genocidal, equal-sider jobs. Crazy far-out entry sends Sarnia student to the national competition. This is a mad story. This is a Canadian story where the kids enrolled in a science fair type project. Jarrett Waller and his roommates at Carleton University from Toronto, Canada, earned spots at the Ontario Engineering Competition. Congratulations. And the Canadian Air Engineering Competitions. Congratulations. After seeing a notice for the school contest and decided to enter, patriotic. They're celebrating with their bottle of wine. They applied to enter the school's competition, were called for a redesigning a table for modern workers, and their idea won. Going to move on to the provincial competition in January. There they were given a week to figure out what to do with the wastewater coming from the site of the Fukushima nuclear disaster in Japan. Just try wrapping your mind around what they just done there. There they were given a week to figure out what to do with the wastewater coming from the Fukushima. Unbelievable, isn't it? He said they're running out of storage, and the challenge was to come up with an economical solution. After spending most of the week trying to come up with a way to treat the water, and then deciding that wasn't an option, I was sitting there thinking, I wonder how much an oil tanker cost, because the water only needs to be stored for 2 years. So the radiation could decay enough for it to be released into the ocean. This is madness, by the way. And Waller and his teammate proposed buying a used oil tanker as a storage vessel. Like we said, we talked about oil tankers back in the day. But the reality of it was that by the gallon, this stuff is a lethal dose. This is not tritiated water. Okay, hang on. I'll show you why I'm saying that, because that's the right thing to do. That's the right thing to do. And Lord knows that's what we do around here, the right thing to do. Let me give you the 411 on Fukushima water. Doesn't take long. So they had two water filtration systems, the Riva, which was France's, and the ELP system, which is Japanese. TEPCO to abandon the Riva system amid contaminated water crisis, August the 12th, 2014, getting close to the end of the year in 2014. For the last 3 years, the system has been unused and kept out of operation. So the Riva system didn't filter any water. The ELP system, TEPCO unable to bring the contaminated water issues under control. The Advanced Liquid Processing System, ELPS, is yet to function reliably. What was the date on that, Dana? That was April 21st, 2014. The Advanced Liquid Processing System, ELPS, is yet to function. The problem was the filter is so radioactive immediately you can't get near it. The system is so radioactive immediately you can't get near it. You can't filter 2.2 sieverts of just beta that they're emitting to. TEPCO, the utility which operates the plant, promised to treat all contaminated water by March 2015. A goal is now emitting will not be realized. And there are certain parts of the site we don't even have control of, meaning it's a lethal dose if you go there. Because it's only the homeless there, by the way. TEPCO says the groundwater bypass operation is not having an effect at Fukushima. This is where they were pumping, that's 2014. This is where they're going to stop the water coming down the hill and pump it around the plant so it didn't go through the reactor meltdowns and get contaminated. And they don't know if it'll ever work. And TEPCO failed to deliver a promise to install a fence to restrict the contamination from leaking into the ocean. Nothing there leaks, everything is hemorrhaging. TEPCO asked the government not to announce that they had committed to constructing the fences as the utility was concerned for $1 billion. So they had no pumping system, they had no filtration system, they had no diversion systems. The ice wall, which is literally the most insane thing imaginable. Why wouldn't you build a real wall? That they have found that the ice wall plans are not progressing. We have yet to form the ice stopper because we can't make the temperature low enough to freeze the water. And TEPCO admitted the ice wall will not stop the groundwater. Like first off, it'll just come up through liquefaction underneath it, and what's above it can go down through it. There's no way to stop it from getting out anyway. Every time it rains, now you got a pool, right, where it just starts filling up with water. The only way for that to escape is it's got to be pumped out or leak out, hemorrhage out. And why build an ice wall? Why not build a real wall? You don't got to wait for a couple of years to see if it freezes. And that story is the crazy story because they claim they had 260,000 people work on building the ice wall. 260,000 people. And if you paid them all $1,200 each with the budget they had, you never had no money for the ice wall. And the ice wall needs at least $9 million a year for maintenance. They built the ice wall because it was an experimental thing, so the government pays for it, not the shareholders from TEPCO, which sold all their shares, and those shares were bought up by vultures, venture capitalists, with the intention of nuclear having a renaissance, and those shares then being relevant again, and they have a nice retirement package worth tens of millions of dollars each, which they're still hoping for, and that's why the lie to them is so important. In 2013, it came out that the Americans flew a plane at 1,000 feet above the ground, and that the map showed over 3,000 becquerels per square meter, over 20 kilometers away from the nuclear power plant, from 1,000 feet up. And this is only gamma, not all the other elements. But the plumes that we already got, and shows the radioactive fallout dispersed over the entire planet, not just Fukushima. But a staggering numbers, because every time it rains, that part of the country washes into the ocean. On top of that, all the radioactive leaves and litter. Proposed buying a used oil tanker. Back to that one. Work to move quake-hit derailed trains began. Now that story there from last March 16th earthquake, which caused around $4 billion worth of damage, was centered right off multiple nuclear meltdowns. And no damage there, but the rest, 12 other prefectures was damaged. Over 1,000 homes damaged. A powerful earthquake earlier this month. Again, they'd done that, right? 7.4, but 6.6 on Japanese seismic intensity scale is 7 is a 9.4 on the Richter scale. Because Japanese use a scale of 1 to 7, right? Of the 17 cars in the train, 16 came off the track. And the official story until that headline there, that story there, which is from Japan's major media, was that no trains really come all the way off the track. It was just one was slightly off the track. Now it comes out, this is far, far away past, the earthquake had to go past the multiple nuclear meltdown site with all the fragile remains on it to get to the train tracks where there's over 1,000 spots need to be repaired. And 4 passengers were injured, which is the first time we heard any of that news. 17 trains came off the track? Really? That's what I mean. Like the truth always seems to come out a couple of weeks later, slowly starts to trickle out. If you're paying attention, you start gathering it up, and you start getting a picture of what really happened. It's impossible to ever trust media again. JR East expects all the cars will be moved from the site by around next weekend. But don't worry, because they're not going to get up and run until around April the 20th. Happened on March the 16th. So 5 weeks before they actually got things working again. Saying originally there was no damage in order to mitigate the fact that it was right off the multiple nuclear meltdown site. Kohlberg, I don't know what's going to study this story. It's something about moving the spent fuel into a local community, but I can't guarantee it because that's blocked, right? Radiation exposure and effects on agricultural. We're not going to get to that story tonight. A nuclear war using less than 0.5% of the world's nuclear artilleries could result in global famine. Dr. Ira Helen, Helfan? I can't even see it. Yeah, I can't pronounce the slang properly. IPPNW co-president, International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. Who the hell is these people? It was founded in 1980 by physicians from the United States and the Soviet Union for the Cold War, and working closely with its U.S. affiliate, Physicians for Social Responsibilities. And who the hell are they? They are organization in 1973 was not active and in effect ceased to exist. Along came Helen Caldicott, 1978 Helen Caldicott, anti-nuclear advocate, traveled widely and found similar physicians' organizations in other countries, including England, Ireland, and started up similar organizations in England, Ireland, Scotland, Japan, New Zealand, Canada, Holland, Germany, Belgium, Scandinavia, Australia. Since 1992, and Physicians for Social Responsibility formally created its environment and health program, PSR had worked to address global warming. Which is, when you see them doing stuff like that, then you know that they're not legit. Okay, so Helen Caldicott, because she can tell a lot of truth. She got a lot of information. She got 14 books, all kinds of documentaries. But she plays both sides of the table. As I'll show you if you give me a second. It's what I call controlled opposition. I'll show you why. I can usually spot it, but tonight is not my night, I guess. We'll get it. I can only hide for so long. All right. Make me work for it, why don't you? Here we go. Is this the long one or the short one? This one. So Helen Caldicott was asked on a radio show, did this building here really look like that 100 feet above here? Was it invisible? And she done this in many, many, many interviews where she told the same story. And this is just an now I put the pictures there to articulate it. The original video is in the center in the top.
Let me ask you this. You've said that if the spent fuel pool in number 4 collapses, that you would evacuate your family from Boston. Do you think we would ever know the truth of what's going on there? And the reason I ask is because we've seen coverage in the national news media here in the United States from ABC News and others that take video cameras in, saying that they're being given exclusive access to number 4 in the removal of the fuel rods, which is said to have begun. And what we see in the video being shared here in America is a pristine interior building. It doesn't look like a building in which the top blew off in a hydrogen explosion.
The Japanese are very tidy people, and they have, by robot control and by human beings, removed the debris from the top of Building 4, and it does look pristine.
The only problem is it doesn't. You can't make it. You can't put the fuel pools were at the top of the building. There's only a stump left. We got a poll tonight, by the way. Let's see how that's going. Can nuclear survive without thousands of degenerate scumbags? Looks like around 12 scumbags came in and said yes. And 68 people, or 84% said no, which is the right answer, of course. So that's unusual to get that many people come in and vote it down. So Helen Caldicott had made that same statement many times, that they got the fuel out of the building. And in fact, she appeared in a lot of those stories with those pictures, where they claimed that was the real reactor 4 and not the real reactor 4. That's just one of many discrepancies we get with Helen. Traveled widely, founded all these organizations all over the world. Since 1992, when PSR formally created its environmental health programs, physician social responsibilities work to address global warming. And global warming, if you're smart, you appreciate what I'm saying to you, is that the entire biosphere, from the ocean floor to the upper tropospheres and solar system, is now polluted with anthropogenic man-made hot particles that are pulsing energy at the speed of light. This has been going on for... now what happens is it kills all the bacteria in the forest, it sterilizes all the insects, and in increments over many years, 7-10 years, those species all start disappearing, and that's the broken food chain. Then the forest will burn much more because the litter didn't break down because you killed the bacteria actually in the forest. And we've seen that in studies originally from Chernobyl, how that actually works. Now, I've done research expeditions year after year after year after year from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska, doing species counts. And what we discovered was just terrifying, was an extinction event. And we're seeing the same thing now on the East Coast, where it's actually an extinction event. So student physicians for social responsibility, get them when they're young. A network of 39 chapters and 650 students, right? This is brainwashing in overdrive. And they're going to look up to people like Helen, see? Students, physicians for social responsibility orients every new generation of medical students, every generation of medical students to be engaged in creating positive change through medical activism. So the Peace Prize was awarded to 107 individuals, 28 organizations, 17 women. The Office United Nations, which is 195 militaries. Yeah, they should get it. That's insane. And who is United Nations? Of course, United Nations is 193 member states, 2 observer states, but it's 95 militaries. Caldicott was awarded 21 honorary doctoral degrees, 21. And one of them created by the Smithsonian Institute was created by the U.S. government. They gave her an honorary degree, U.S. government. Women's History Month is an annual declared month that highlights the contribution of women to events in history. So this puts her on a pedestal when you put her up in these positions, right? This was an article Caldicott wrote in just after, a little over a week after Fukushima. That picture was there. None of the kids were radioactive, but they picked up 60 million one-ton bags of radiation. Now, George Monbiot had come out pro-nuclear. He was originally against nuclear. Fukushima happened, and he loved nuclear. It was disgusting what he done. She said George Monbiot accused her, Helen Caldicott, and others who called attention to potential serious medical consequences at Fukushima, cherry-picking data and overstating the health effects of radiation from the radioactive fuel in the destroyed reactors and their cooling pools that don't exist anymore. The cooling pools were gone. She knew that at the time. And she knew the reactors were gone at that time too, because she was in a position to know this stuff. And anybody in the know who knew a lot about this topic back then would have been aware of that immediately. In the destroyed reactors, and their cooling pools don't exist. They're gone. I showed you that earlier. By reassuring the public that things aren't too bad, Mombiot and others at best misinform, and at worst misrepresent or distort, which is what she's doing, isn't it? I'll show you again. Mombiot, who's a journalist, not a scientist, appears unaware of the differences between external, this is super important, between external and internal radiation. Let me educate him, says Helen Caldicott. Between external and internal radiation. The former, external, is what the population were exposed to with atomic bombs detonated over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Unbelievable. She's claiming that the Hiroshima and Nagasaki victims didn't inhale any radiation. Dirty, 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 disgusting thing to do, and she knows better. The former, external, radiation is what the population were exposed to when atomic bombs were detonated. That's disgusting, Helen. My goodness. You wicked witch, you. Internal radiation, on the other hand, so she's making a big discrepancy between both of them. She's claiming Nagasaki, Hiroshima, and I'm going to challenge that too, emanates from the radioactive elements which enters the body by inhalation, ingestion, and skin absorption. Right? She's very good if she wants to be. She knows the difference. Hiroshima, Nagasaki, 1945. External. So, I'm going to show you some studies from Hiroshima, Nagasaki. I usually do a presentation on the anniversary of both of them each year, so 2 presentations. And I bring just nothing but academic studies to articulate what was going on. Because the Hiroshima and Nagasaki victims, first off, the reason they said there was no internal, because if they said there was internal, it implied airborne radiation. They couldn't rebuild Hiroshima and Nagasaki back on the nuclear bomb craters. And you couldn't get people to stay there. Not only that, for 76 years, the Japanese government refused to acknowledge that the people at Hiroshima and Nagasaki ingested radiation and were only treated for external radiation. And then last year on the anniversary, Shinzo Abe, but Suga decided to let the people that managed to live for 76 years with these debilitating illnesses from radiation, internal exposures, to give them some medical attention at the end of their life. And you know what that is? Chemotherapy. Global transport of plutonium from Nagasaki to the Arctic. So Nagasaki, radiation like plutonium, for goodness sakes, named after the devil, traveled to the Arctic, but the victims at Ground Zero didn't ingest any. Uranium-239-240 plutonium discharged, or plutonium-239-240 was discharged to the atmosphere along with fission products like cesium. And the fate of the plutonium and cesium was investigated by analyzing both local and global fallout. Global fallout from the total amount of disposition of local fallout regions at 264 kilometers. But they claimed there was none of the victims breathed anything in. That's what Helen just done too. It was measured by collecting 10 ice cores at Ellesmere Island in Canada. And it was plutonium and cesiums were originating from Nagasaki. Internal plutonium radiation exposures in Nagasaki atomic bomb victims. Actual studies that Helen refuses to acknowledge. She said, let me educate him. The former is what the population were exposed to when atomic bombs were detonated over Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. External doses. Internal radiation, plutonium radiation exposure to Nagasaki atomic bomb victims. Helen. Disposition records plutonium-137 cesium released from Nagasaki atomic bomb in sediment at a Nishiyama reservoir for Nagasaki. So the drinking water supply is highly radioactive. So now they're consuming it also and washing their clothes and drinking it and getting showers in it. In the sediment core of the reservoir at Nagasaki City, depth profiles of plutonium, isotopic ratios, and cesium activities were determined. It was deposited immediately after the detonation of the Nagasaki atomic bomb. The biological consequences of human exposure to plutonium, americium, and curium. A population may be exposed to plutonium, americium, and curium in various ways following their releases into the environment. Particles containing the radiation can be inhaled either as a result of airborne releases or following their resuspension or contaminated foodstuff, or water may be contaminated. This would result in irradiation of either the lungs or the guts, and a fraction of the incorporated radionuclides will be solutable in the body fluids and translocate from the site of the entry to be deposited in and irradiate other tissues of the body, in particular the liver and the skeleton. The liver and the skeleton. But early late somatic damage could occur in exposed population, and hereditary effects may occur in the descendants. And radiation-induced deaths from leukemia, from cancers of the bone, liver, lung, and intestinal tracts. Plutonium mass balance released from Nagasaki A bombs. So there's a lot of evidence there, Helen, that it wasn't just external, you wicked witch, you. The existence of plutonium was publicly revealed on the 9th of August 1945, Helen, by the nuclear explosion of Nagasaki A bomb, whose plutonium critical mass would be considered to be between 10 and 15 kilograms and still classified. The amount of about local and global fallout. Disposition rates were determined for surface soils, reservoir, sediment, concentration, vegetation, fish, other living materials up to 100 kilometers from the hypocenter. Let the chips fall where they may. There's the evidence. Plutonium was deposited throughout the northern hemisphere's global fallout, but not ground zero where they rebuilt the cities on the nuclear bomb craters, right? Plutonium was deposited throughout the northern hemisphere's global fallout. Radiation as a weapon of mass destruction. With the exception of the atomic bomb used during World War II, at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan, no attempt using radiation as a weapon of mass destruction has been successful. Kind of a little bit overwhelming evidence there, isn't it? Cancer incidents in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Why they got all these studies for if there was no internal doses, Helen? Population of Hiroshima and Nagasaki now have among the highest rates of liver cancer in the world. It's not from external, Helen. Reparation for the frightful wounds inflicted on the whole human family. 2020, August the 5th. What should our attitude be towards the dropping of the uranium gun-type bomb, Little Boy, in Hiroshima, and the plutonium implosion, Fat Man bomb, on Nagasaki, which between them killed 129,000 and 226,000 people, and wounded more than 650,000 more, almost 1 million people. Because they only targeted the people that died right away, not the latent deaths over the next couple of months. In the United States, a sense of patriotism has kept many of us from confronting how World War II ended and to question the morality of the bombs dropped by Enola Gay and Brock Scar, mainly on the Japanese non-combatants. We had already, after all, obliterated 67 Japanese cities with fire bombings, destroying 267,000 buildings and killing 100,000 people in Tokyo in a single night. So it didn't matter if they had the atomic bomb, they were genocidal. And the birth of the age of the atomic and the threat of global self-suicide. So the taser bomb, the largest atomic bomb in world history that we know about, was estimated to be about 3,800 times the size of the Hiroshima. Imagine if United States and Russia uses 1,800 Hiroshima Nagasaki bombs against each other. Is that a nuclear war? If Russia and America fires 1,500 15-kiloton nuclear weapons, is that a nuclear war? Because it is. And using it in just a single bomb is the same emissions. It's actually evil. So when they say there's only 2,000 nuclear bombs tested, just one of them is equal to 3,800 of just one of those bombs they were alluding to. The flare was visible for a distance of 1,000 kilometers. The blast wave circled the globe 3 times. And that all buildings in the village of Severny, both wooden and brick, located 55 kilometers, 35 miles from ground zero, were destroyed. And one participant in the test saw a bright flash with dark goggles and felt the effects of the thermal pulse at 170 miles away, and that the heat from the explosion could have caused third-degree burns at 100 kilometers from ground zero, and a shock wave was observed in the air 700 kilometers away, and the window panes were broken from distances of 900 kilometers away. So what about all the wildlife in that zone and the people? The taser, a bomb by the most powerful nuclear weapon. This is what done all that. It was equal to 3,800 Hiroshimas worth of radiation too on top of that. About 3,800 times the power of the 15-kiloton atomic bomb that destroyed Hiroshima in 1945. And generated a mushroom cloud that towered nearly 2,000 feet. 200,000 feet. I mean, that's madness. Originally, they envisioned a 100 megaton weapon with a high level of radiation. But settled for one of slightly more than half that much explosive power after USSR political leadership expressed worries about contamination from such a blast. Well, going half is just as evil. And the Japanese authorities found the highest levels of radiation in rainwater than they've ever detected. So the radioactive fallout was real. This was a real event. It was catastrophic and changed the sex ratio of all species around the entire planet, most likely. Invisible clouds of radioactive ash that drifted eastward across the Pacific, across Canada and the Great Lakes regions of the United States. And U.S. scientists reassured the public most of the debris from the taser bomb would stay high in the stratosphere and gradually lose its radioactivity by the time it fell to Earth. How many times have we heard that? We heard that with 3 Mile Island. We heard that with Chernobyl. We heard that with Fukushima. They come out and they cut your throat right away. They don't even hesitate. And lose its radioactivity by the time it fell to Earth. Oh, my goodness. Which is why we're going to poll tonight, right? Can the nuclear survive without hundreds of thousands of degenerate scumbags? We got a resounding 79 votes, 85%. 85% of the people said, no, they can only survive if they're all scumbags. U.S. scientists reassure the public. So how many people work for the World Health or United Nations? Some numbers are 45,000. Some numbers are 36,000. They make an average apparently from 50,000 a year to 160,000 a year. So if you split it out of 70,000 a year, that's $2.8 billion a year for United Nations employees. That's not counting all the freebies, hotels and transportations and food and everything. And you know they don't eat Walmart. They don't eat from Walmart or McDonald's. The UN Population Fund. See, that's some scary stuff. The United Nations, which is 195 militaries. The World Food Program, which is United Nations. The Office of United Nations High Commission for Refugees. The 195 militaries create the refugees, then they're in charge of them. UN Environmental Program, United Nations. Another UN organization's established Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. I beat the shit out of them at the Constipated Party 26 last year, right? I done 13 days and I curb stomped them. The United Nations sponsored Kyoto Protocol, which was the takeover of the planet, the start of the takeover. That morphed into the 2015 now in France. The General Assembly approves $3 billion UN budget for 2020. They need $2.85 billion just to pay wages, not including additional sources. But this is just, so most of the money they got is donated each year by countries that don't have enough money for their own people, but got lots of money for United Nations, 193 militaries. United Nations is financed from assist and voluntary contribution from member states. So if the member states make a certain, whatever their gross national product is, that's assist. And so much of that's got to get kicked back to the Mafia Don, which is United Nations. The peacekeeping budget for 2015-16 was $8.27 billion for 82,000 troops. And remember all the scandals with the United Nations, sex for food for the refugees, had to have sex with the United Nations peacekeepers. They're peacekeepers, are right? Rest in peace, everybody that ends up coming in contact with them. The largest contributors for UN peacekeeping financial operations for the period 2019-21 are United States at 28%, China at 15%, Japanese at 8%, Germany at 6%, United Kingdom at 6%, France at 5.5%, Italy at 3.3%, Russia at 3%. Wow, I can't believe we didn't see Canada in that one. Special UN programs not included, and there's so many UN programs I can't possibly cover half of them, let alone all of them. So UNICEF is United Nations, 195 militaries. The World Food Program is United Nations, 195 militaries. And financed by voluntary contributions from member governments, corporations, and private individuals like Bill Gates. Special UN programs not included in the regular budget like UNICEF and World Food Programs. France wants the UN to be the center of global governance. The global governments, aka United Nations. Who gives a fuck what France wants? If you look at what France done, their crimes against the French Polynesians, against the Niger, the Civil War for 60 plus years so they can get cheap uranium for their reactors. Nobel Peace Prize. So the Nobel Peace Prize is one of 5 Nobel Prizes established by the will of a Swedish industrialist, inventor, and armament. Is military weapons and equipment manufacturer. So if you get the Nobel Peace Prize, that's the military industrial complex giving you a pat on the back. You don't get a pat on the back from the military industrial complex unless you're a bootlicker, unless you're a misery machine, right? Number of agencies, individuals associated with the United Nations have won the Nobel Peace Prize. UNICEF won the prize, again, United Nations. International Labour Organization, you guessed it, United Nations. The UN Peacekeeping Forces is United Nations. International Atomic Energy is United Nations. The UN Supporter Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons is United Nations. UN High Commission for Refugees is United Nations. United Nations as a whole was awarded the prize in 2001 on top of that. And in 2007, the IPCC, which is United Nations, got it, for their efforts to build up and disseminate greater knowledge about man-made climate change and to lay the foundation for the measures that are needed to counteract such change, which is this last year, COP26. We done 13 days on it. They started that on Halloween and ended on the 13th, was it? I'm sorry, it was 13 days anyway. Since its founding, there have been many calls for reforming the United Nations, but little consensus on how to do it. Well, send all of them to Reactor 3 at Fukushima. Anyone that comes out of it can play the game later. And there you have it anyway. So we do on the poll tonight. We need one more vote on the poll to get 80. The big show tonight, was it? Let's finish the poll out here in a minute. I'm going to close it in about 60 seconds or something. 79 votes, 85%. So it looks like we got spammed by the pro-nuclear community tonight. We never see 15% opposition, ever. So we're going to end that poll in a few moments. I'm burnt out. So we got a couple of projects finished the weekend. I'm busted up, actually. I'm out of shape. The compressor and the air tools are amazing. And I'm motivated now all of a sudden because it's easy to do, right? And we got the tools, we got the socket sets, we got air tools, we got a compressor. I still got to pick up a few odds and ends. We got to get a air dryer. They're like 35 or 40 bucks for the compressor. And we need a pressure regulator valve up close to where I'm using the tool. Because there's one on the tank, right? But we only got a short hose right now. We got to get a longer hose, like a 50-foot, 100-foot hose. And a few other odds and ends. But I mean, it's workable like it is. But you really need the pressure control valve up at a couple of feet away from where you're using the tools. Because by the time you get to the end of your hose, you're losing all that pressure. Super awesome. It's going to take a little bit getting used to these tools. They're very torquey. I almost tore their arm off me yesterday. I'll learn. It'll only take a few days. I'll figure it out. We got a lot of work to get done, so it's certainly going to make life a lot better for me. What am I doing? Am I giving a call out tonight? Yeah, let's do that. Why not? Now, because in my comments section, I won't get the first hour or 2 hours of comments. And we got 79 votes. We're still waiting to hopefully get one more vote. Close it on 80. That's what we're hoping to get. I'll do a quick shout out before I close it. Richard, Shane, Patrick, James Lucet. Hi, James. Shane Clark. John Curtis. Port Angeles. Chelsea. Peaceware. Andrew B. Obsolete Optics. We got lots of people tonight. I'm just going to scroll down through the comments quickly. I'm not going to go through everything. It's over 3 hours straight. It was so much. Steve Young. Hi, Steve. Hope you're doing better, my friend. I know you got a long way to go. Mr. Sir. Turn that down a bit. Dale P. Katja. Albert, Danny, Chet, Austin. Good night, everybody. I should have took the weekend off. I'm so burnt out. Don't mind me, folks, when I say that. It's a long show. Anybody's burnt out when you do all the work I've done, and then you sit here and you tell the story. That's just the way it works. I'll be okay. But tomorrow morning, a lot of aches and pains, though, this morning when I woke up. I expect that. It'll take a few days to get used to being back on the tools. Dale, I'm scrolling. James Appleton. Hi, James. All right. I'm just moving a bit quicker than normal. We can call it. Looks good. Christopher. Let me get down. Colette. Hi, Colette. Scrolling. I'm almost down there. Cutie Susie. Thank you. Dana Nasana. Hi, Dana. Looks like you had another quiet night. Thank goodness. Well, I didn't think I was going to get through everything tonight, and then I just decided I better do it because it'll be coming at me all night and all day tomorrow, right? Kamsi. Yeah, hi, everybody. So we're back down. I'm going to end the poll here in a second. Right now, actually. They probably got me censored anyway. We've got 81 votes. Let's look at that before we close it down. So it's on the screen for everybody. 81 votes. 85% of the people said nuclear cannot survive without thousands of degenerate scumbags. It's one of my favorite polls of all time. So awesome, eh? Let's end the poll. There you go. That's a great poll. Looks like we missed the sale for the drill bits. That won't come up again till next year for the cobalt drill bits. Because they're freaking expensive, eh? That's the only thing really that I absolutely gonna have to get, because it won't work without those drill bits. I will get them at some point. But like say, the full set is around $160 before it goes on sale, and the sale is over for the year, I would imagine. And that stuff sold out in like one day that they had down there locally. Ted Richards, that's it for me, folks. I don't eat and drink during these long shows now. Nothing. I eat and drink while I'm doing this, getting the show ready. It's all business, though. Let's call it a night. And Rainey, you're such a terrible person. Why not go get a real job? Why be a monster? I put some new shirts up at my nuclear merchandise shop. You have to scroll to the bottom of the page typically to see the newest editions if you go and look. And there's links down in the bottom of the description, the very bottom. There's 2 links at the very bottom to donate directly to me that we've been using for almost a decade. Never been a hitch. Everything helps, and we're so close to having everything for the gear now. We're just going to keep going and do the best we can, right? I'm doing the best I can. I'll see everybody on the other side. Whoops. See everybody, hopefully tomorrow night I'll have enough energy to do the next show. It's a big show tonight. It's a tough gig. I'm busted up too, so that's probably why I was able to do it. I'm busted up anyway, so. It's better to do, like when I put all that work together to tell the story, it's better to tell the whole story than part of the story. Despite the amount of work, it's still better to get it out there. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you get an opportunity. It costs us little, it goes a long way, hopefully. God bless everybody, hugs for everybody. Have a great night, great day tomorrow. It's a great day to be alive. Hugs and love for everybody. We'll see everybody tomorrow night, hopefully. Have a great night. Take care, folks.